576 Regret. Wait, what worms? Asked Tosaka. And nothing, replied Sakura. Crest worm, a shoddy form of dark magic that uses worms as an intermediary. After transplanting the worm into a host's body, you can control them by influencing their mind, emotions, and memories. You can pass down knowledge, which is how the Mata family has preserved their lineage for many years, explained Edward. However, most people don't know that Zukin has been using this thing to absorb life energy from people to sustain his longevity. She has one of those inside her body, asked Tosaka, her eyes once again red with lust for murder. Unfortunately. Breath in and out, Rin, thought Tosaka, trying to calm down. A few seconds later, she looked at Edward. You can remove it. No problem. What about that bastard Zukin? Will he find out and run away? Possibly, but I can track him to the world's end. Plus, if we hurry, we can catch him before he does so. Good. Let's move. No, you can't, pleaded Sakura. Don't worry, you'll be fine, reassured Tosaka. No, you simply can't. Tosaka frowned before anger once again rushed into her head. He could not fathom how much trauma had been placed on his sister for her to be so afraid of that bastard Zukin. On top of everything, she also had to suffer at the hands of Shinji. Do you know who he is? Tosaka asked, pointing toward Edward, but Sakura did not respond. She only looked at the floor while her body would occasionally tremble. He's the legendary Arcane Emperor. I'm sure you've heard of it. Sakura slowly raised her head. Why Yuri, telling the truth. What magician has not heard of the Arcane Emperor? Who amongst them has never dreamed of living in that era considered the pinnacle of magic development? Why should I lie? Sakura slowly looked at Edward, who put on his brightest smile. However, internally, he was rolling his eyes. He did not understand why Akasha gave him such a potent legend or backstory. You're really him. The one and only, replied Edward. I imagine you much more handsome. Edward's lips twitched. I don't think I was known for my beauty. True, but some records said you were a womanizer with many queens. I figure someone like that would be extremely handsome, Sakura said softly. My charm is more from my personality and vast knowledge of many subjects. So, it's true you were a womanizer. I decline to comment. Sakura chuckled at this comment. Let's begin, and you don't need to worry with me present, reassured Edward, and Sakura finally agreed to cooperate. Edward pointed his staff on her forehead, releasing a green light. A few seconds later, a worm was forced out of her brain, and a surge of energy rushed throughout Sakura's body, almost making her moan. This feeling, she muttered. You have already lost a lot of life energy. So, I reversed the worm's effect and stole life energy from Zukin to replenish what you've lost and more. You're guaranteed to live to 110 unless something major or unexpected occurs. I don't know how to feel about this information, proclaimed Sakura. It's good to know she has a long life ahead of her, but it's also scary knowing the exact year she will die. We're wasting time. That bastard might be running away anytime, said Tosaka. All right, Ms. Diva. I'll teleport us to his location. Edward tapped his staff on the floor, and a magic circle enveloped him and the two sisters. Wait, I want to go too, yelled Shirou Emiya. No, Edward directly declined. Sakura is my friend, and I feel bad that I never knew her home life was so terrible. Now that I know, I want to be there as support and help in whatever ways I can. Shirou-senpai, muttered Sakura with a doting look in her eyes. Please, let him come with us. Edward groaned as she gave him puppy eyes. You shouldn't even come given what he's done to you, it might be triggering. No, I have to face him, I must watch with my eyes, replied Sakura firmly, and Edward decided to change tactics. Fine, but we need someone to keep an eye on Shinji. Shirou is the best candidate. But he's unconscious, and I doubt he's waking up anytime soon. No, things are not so simple, countered Edward. If I remember correctly, Sakura summoned Ryder and gave control of him to Shinji. It did not come to rescue him because he ordered her to work with Castor. She will come to his rescue once she detects something is wrong. Is that true? Asked Tosaka. Check his hands, you will see the command seals. She checked on him and discovered makeup that covered the seals. Shirou, keep an eye on Shinji. Let's go. The magic circle light, and the three disappeared from the room. Spatial manipulation, muttered Tosaka with shining eyes. She wanted to learn this spell immediately, but this was not the time. She looked around to see an extremely thin elderly man trying to walk down a secret tunnel. The latter had blood streaming down his nose and a look of shock at the sight of them suddenly materializing. You must be Zukin, said Tosaka with gritted teeth. Rin Tosaka? Sakura, uttered Zukin. Why are you here? You know why we're here. Zukin did not say anything and immediately exploded into a pile of thousands of worms, each running in different directions. It's pointless, said Edward. I've already isolated this area. You guys only need to kill all the worms until only one last one remains. Tosaka did not have to be told twice. She immediately activated her gem magic and attacked everywhere. Sakura first hesitated, but after a few seconds, she followed, killing as many as those worms who were her childhood nightmare. The process was so satisfying, and after close to 30 minutes, only one worm remained, and it transformed into Zukin. You can't do this, he said in a feeble voice. Sakura, I raised you like my own daughter. You can't do this to me. Daughter? You treated me like a pawn for your cursed ambition of immortality, cursed Sakura. How dare you say you treated me like a daughter? But I raised you. Doesn't that count for anything? Persuaded Zukin. All I'm asking for is a second chance. Just let me go, I promise I will never do it again. I will live my life in solitude until the end of my days. I'm begging you." Sakura looked at the person who caused her nightmare for over a decade. As she saw his pathetic pleading, she discovered how ridiculous of her to be afraid of someone like that, someone with no honor or shred of dignity. Simultaneously, she also felt pity for his situation. "He's lying," suddenly said Edward. "He has a few worms hidden worldwide and is counting on them to survive this ordeal. He's just putting on a show." "You." Zuken pointed his bony finger at him, his body trembling in anger. "Damn bastard," roared Tosaka, ready to end his miserable life. "No," said Edward. "She has the right to dictate his end." Tosaka stopped and looked at her sister. Sakura did not hesitate and used a projectile spell that blew Zuken's head off. Immediately afterward, she couched on the ground and began sobbing uncontrollably. She did not know why but only felt like crying non-stop. Tosaka approached and hugged her. Edward calmly looked at this. He went to all of this because of regrets. Back in primordial Earth, he had watched many shows and had regrets about many characters. The three he felt most intense about were Nina from Fullmetal Alchemist and the other was Sakura and Ilia's fate. Now that he had avenged her, he had this odd sensation that some of his regrets had been overcome. 577 media. After more than 10 minutes, Sakura finally stopped crying, and Tosaka looked at Edward. "What should we do about the other worms?" "Don't worry. I've already placed a curse on them, they should be dead by now," Edward replied casually. "That's good. In that case, let's return home." Edward teleported the group back home, and as soon as they saw the state of Tosaka's mansion, they knew something had happened. "What's going on?" asked Tosaka. "He was right," said Shiro. "Someone tried to release Shinji. Was it another servant?" Shiro nodded. Edward looked at the destruction around him, and he was slightly surprised. He expected Ryder to take action but did not expect she would act so swiftly. He thought she would take at least one day before acting. His original intention for preventing Shiro from accompanying them was not due to his disdain for him. He did not want his morality to influence Sakura and Tosaka, preventing them from killing the garbage of a human called Zuken. "Can you fix this?" asked Tosaka, and Edward looked at her, his lips twitching. "Please," she added. "Hey, Shiro, you've learned basic repair magic. Come practice." "Why should I? This is partly the mess you've made, so shouldn't you fix it?" rebutted Edward. "You have a point." Then, Shiro began to use the basic knowledge he had acquired to fix the damage from the previous battle. Tosaka was speechless at this exchange, but the unconscious Shinji soon diverted her attention. "Now, what to do with you?" Her eyes did not hide the desire for bloodlust. "Please, don't kill him. Are you serious?" Tosaka looked at his lost sister. "After what he's done." "He was not always like that," replied Sakura. "He used to be a sweet and kind brother. This does not change what's become and done. Please, for my sake, don't kill him." Tosaka looked her in the eyes, and uncontrollably, her eyes softened, and the rage overwhelming her mind due to the guilt rapidly dissipated. "Fine, but from now on, he will live his life as less than a man, and the Mata bloodline will end with him." "Tosaka, isn't that a little too much?" "Mind your own business," snapped Tosaka while glaring at Shiro. Then, a few seconds later, Shinji's wailing scream made every man in the room instinctively tremble and clutch their legs. Tosaka punched him to knock him out and stop his screaming. Edward gave this girl a thump as he did not expect she would be so ruthless and decisive. "We should get a move on," said Edward. "What's your plan?" Tosaka was calm enough to listen and plan out their next move. Castor is still sucking the life energy from the children in school while creating a bounded field in the Ryuada temple. She will be much harder to deal with once she succeeds. "You have a point. I remember you said Ryder was now their ally," asked Tosaka. "That's right. Then, our best move is to force Shinji to forfeit his identity as a master." "I was going to suggest this," nodded Edward, and Tosaka walked to the still unconscious Shinji. She suddenly stopped. "Where's his command seals?" "What are you talking about?" asked Edward, who walked beside her. "You're right, it's gone." "Shiro, did something happen when you were protecting him?" No. Saber held up their servant while I closely watched him. "Castor must have done something while you were distracted. You're lucky she did not kill you for whatever reason," added Edward. "This doesn't make sense. Shinji had to be conscious to hand over his seals, and Shiro would have noticed if he had. So, how did she get it?" "Some kind of spell. Probably since she's a very talented magician," replied Edward. "If we can defeat her, I might be able to use a similar spell to get the position of caster." "You're not the caster?" asked Sakura, and Edward gave her a look that said, "Wasn't it obvious?" "Well, you're the arcane emperor and used many spells, so I figured you would be the caster as the servant. I'm too powerful, so the Grail had to nerf me." "That makes sense." "Don't listen to his narcissistic talk," chimed Tosaka before looking at Shiro. "Are you coming with us?" "Of course. I wouldn't want anything to happen to you." She looked at Edward and asked, "Do you have any problem with this?" "No, but Sakura has to stay home." "Why?" "I can help. Although you're gifted, you lack battle experience. So, it's best to stay here. I will leave a barrier in this mansion that will protect you." "But, I agree with him," said Tosaka. "And that's final. Let's move before it's too late." With Edward's help, they instantly reached the stairs leading to the Ryuada temple. Everyone, except for Shiro, could see the massive amount of magical energy surrounding this temple. "We were almost too late," commented Tosaka. Bounded fields are like pseudo-domains. In comparison, they are like the arcane/magic towers from Edward's world. An arcanist will have an absolute advantage in their towers when doing anything, and it's the same for the bounded field in this world. Swish! Someone with a magic robe covering their robes appeared before them. She seemed to pause after seeing Edward before focusing on the group. I did not expect you to come so swiftly, said Castor. Do you know me? Asked Edward, who noticed the pause. What an odd question. I already know you're Medea, the princess of Colchis. So, you can answer my question if that's what you're worried about. Medea paused before removing the hoodie, showing her light blue hair and pointed ears. It's nice to see you again, your majesty. So, you do know me. You don't remember. Sadly, no, replied Edward. You should have been one of the magicians I invited. Yes, and with your theory on anti-magic, I was able to elevate my rule-breaker to a higher level. Every time Edward heard about his background or legend, he wanted to curse Akasha. I don't mean to be rude or insulting, but was our relationship strictly professional? Knowing himself and Akasha's means, he had to ask this question. Medea's face turned red. We kissed once, but you said that I was not in the best emotional state to enter any relationship after what happened with Jason. At this point, rolling his eyes and cursing were not enough to indicate how he felt about this situation. Well, I apologize for not being able to reminisce about the past. That's fine. After all, we are currently enemies, replied Medea. And I won't show any mercy to my enemy. The feeling is mutual. In that case, let's see who the last man standing is. She disappeared from the temple's entrance. What are you looking at? Asked Edward after he saw everyone intently glancing at him. I'm not judging, just surprised, said Shiro. I am, added Saber. She did not like this kind of unfaithful man. I knew there were rumors you were a womanizer, but it's different seeing it personally, commented Tosaka. No is perfect, and that rule also applies to me, shrugged Edward. Let's move on. The group tried to enter the temple, and someone was already waiting at the gate. The man appeared to be of Japanese origin and had a katana on his side. Who is this? Tosaka did not anticipate this unknown enemy. Assassin, replied Edward. Why is he here? Castor summoned him. She can do that. Apparently, yes. So, what's the plan? Saber, he will be your opponent while we move on, said Edward, but she ignored him and looked at Shiro. This might be the best. So, Saber finally accepted this plan. You better win this fight as soon as possible. My intuition tells me things will not proceed smoothly, added Edward before they move on. 578 True objective. As the group entered the temple, the next person to stop them was Tosaka and Shiro's teacher, Soichiro Kuzuki. Mr. Kuzuki. Shiro did not expect to meet his teacher there. Shiro, Tosaka, said Kuzuki in a calm tone. I did not expect the situation to reach this stage so quickly. Why are you involving the schoolchildren in this fight? Asked Tosaka. You don't understand. I will do whatever is necessary to ensure her victory and safety. Ah, love, what a beautiful yet destructive force, sighed Edward. Really? Asked Tosaka, looking at him with fiery eyes. What? I may disagree with his actions, but I can respect them. Tosaka snorted before looking at her teacher. I will deal with him. No, he's Shiro's opponent, said Edward. Why? I don't think he has much of a chance. Hey, added Shiro. It's true, said Tosaka before waiting for Edward's explanation. Haven't you realized who is coming next? Ryder, she replied after a short ponder. Do you think he has a remote chance against a servant? You're right, but you should do something to help him. Edward did not argue with her and patted Shiro on the shoulder. His body shone with golden light. This should help you hold him long enough until Saber comes to rescue you. Let's go. He took one step and appeared behind Kuzuki with Tosaka next to him. You could have given him the strength to defeat his enemy, she complained. You give me too much credit, he replied as they flew toward the inner part of the temple. As expected, Ryder appeared before them. Remember, her identity is Medusa, so look out for her eyes, reminded Edward before disappearing. At the center of the temple, he saw Medea on a black throne, holding a long staff. You know, I'm looking forward to this fight more than I care to admit, said Medea. This might be my only opportunity to defeat you. I'm afraid you'll be disappointed, said Edward, looking around the room. He detected his room was a bounded field, granting her the home field advantage. If I remember correctly, Medea's bounded field allows her to use magic on Par with true magic, thought Edward. We'll see. Medea's cape floated behind her like bat wings, and she flew in the air. 10 small purple magic circles appeared around her before firing purple beams. Edward felt the surrounding spacetime had been influenced, making his actions slow down and the space restricting him. Using spacetime magic on me. He raised his staff, and 10 magic circles materialized before him, firing golden beams. The mini spacetime continuum that Medea created around him was forcefully destroyed. The golden beams continued their path and soon overwhelmed the purple beams. Medea teleported to her right to evade, but more golden beams reached her. She pointed her staff forward and opened a spatial hole that swallowed the beams and sent them outside the temple. Edward calmly tapped his staff on the ground, and another spatial hole appeared behind, returning the same golden beam. Medea moved her body to evade, but one of the beams grazed her shoulder, making her grunt. Before she could react further, 10 more beams rushed toward her, so she used spatial teleportation again. To her horror, she did not teleport to her chosen destination but appeared before Edward, who had 10 more golden beams waiting for her. Space blockade. Medea mobilized all her mana and the boost from her bounded field to create countless layers of spatial walls before her to block the beams. Her action brought her a moment of respite to physically move her body away from Edward. Medea looked at him, sighing heavily. Fighting you is the same. And how is that? Like a teacher teaching their students? No, even worse, like an adult teaching a child their first step. It's really frustrating. Haha, I imagine it is, said Edward with a smile. So, what's your next step? Medea no longer hesitated and summoned a curved dagger. This was her noble phantasm, Rule Breaker. It had only one purpose: to destroy magic. She flew toward Edward with no hesitation. Swish, swish, swish. Her blade easily cut through the golden beams, and Edward placed a towering ice wall between them. She sliced through it like a piece of paper. Not bad, but that is far from enough to win you this battle, said Edward as he tapped his staff on the ground, forming cracks and small rocks. He used a simple spell from childhood, Wad Away Psi Charm, or the projectile jinx. The stones flew with unparalleled might, forcing Medea to stop her advance and evade. Her rule breaker only worked on magic and not physical objects. So, although she could cut off the spell put on the rocks, it would be too late as the velocity of these things was enough to damage her body severely. Medea suddenly screamed. Although she tried to evade, the rocks were too fast, and too penetrated her legs. She tried to cast a shield spell, but a golden beam hit instead of rocks, tearing it apart. Finally, 2 rocks pierced her hands, dropping Rule Breaker. I'm defeated, she said. That you are, nodded Edward, walking before her. He wanted to kneel so he could look her in the eyes and on the same level, but his sense of danger suddenly activated, so he moved backward while trying to summon Rule Breaker to his side. A weird spear descended from the sky, stopping his summoning spell, but he anticipated this move and had secretly used invisible strings to pull the dagger to his side. Holding the dagger, he looked in the air in the corner of this room. Gilgamesh, why are you intervening in things that don't concern you? Everything between heaven and earth concerns me and is my business, declared the King of Heroes boldly. I'm here to help, yelled Tosaka, rushing into the room. She looked at Edward, then Medea, and Gilgamesh. Who's the blondie? King of Heroes, replied Edward. Gilgamesh. You're here at the perfect time, said Gilgamesh, cutting their conversation. What do you mean? Do you know your servant betrayed you? What nonsense are you talking about? Asked Tosaka. You see that dagger in his hand? With it, he can sever the servant-master contract between you two, regaining his freedom. Is that true? Asked Tosaka, looking at Edward, but his eyes were on Gilgamesh. I cannot wait to rip those clairvoyant eyes from your socket. Such a gift should be left to someone like you. Haha, if not for your current situation amusing me, I would have ripped you apart for your insolence. Answer me, yelled Tosaka. He's telling the truth, replied Edward calmly. Why, don't you know who I am? Do you think someone like me will allow anyone to have dominion over him? Explained Edward, who plunged the dagger into his heart. Tosaka looked at her arm and saw her command seals had disappeared. She looked at Edward with gritted teeth. Although she had only known him briefly, Tosaka thought of him as someone close to her. Tears flew in the corner of her eyes. I trusted you. I thought of you as a father figure. There is no need for this. I'm a person who keeps my word. Since I said I will help you win the war and teach you magic, I will keep my word, said Edward. But things have to be done my way without a looming threat over my head. Really? I don't need to lie to you. Then, why didn't you say this sooner? She wiped out her tears. Make me shed tears for no reason. Edward rolled his eyes. This girl can change emotions like changing clothes. How boring, said Gilgamesh. Since you're no longer entertaining, you can go die. Countless golden space breaches materialized behind him, followed by different weapons emanating from them. 579 EA. What is this? Asked Tosaka. The Gate of Babylon, said to contain all the world's treasures, explained Edward. All of them? Maybe. Are you mocking me? Asked Gilgamesh with red eyes. What do you mean? You know very well none of the mystic codes you've created ever appeared in my vault. Oh, replied Edward, whose corner of the mouth almost twitched. That's all you have to say? Go die. Hundreds of weapons rushed toward everyone present in the room. A smirk appeared on Edward's face as he thought of something. He copied Gilgamesh's Gate of Babylon by accessing his treasure in the floating city and sending it out through space magic. So, a spectacular sight developed in this temple. Weapons from both sides of the room clashed against each other, forming a beautiful rain of metal and magic lights. You also have a Gate of Babylon? Asked Tosaka. No, but as probably this planet's greatest alchemist, I've created thousands of mystic codes and have access to my treasury. I thought you said you couldn't do that before, asked Tosaka, remembering the pain she endured while modifying her soul due to the lack of potion. I'm a free man now and have fewer limitations. Damn you, roared Gilgamesh. He had never felt so humiliated. This arcane emperor not only prevents him from acquiring his treasures but also dares to imitate his greatest treasure. You all must die. EA. A black but blunt sword tip slowly emerged from the golden gates. As soon as Edward saw it, he knew what it was his objective in this world. Got you, he thought, waiting for the sword to manifest fully. He cast a spell, but no one detected it, not even Gilgamesh's clairvoyant eyes. It's time for us to leave, he told Tosaka. Why? It's not yet time to face him. Is he that powerful? He's called the King of Heroes for a reason. Leaving? No one is leaving here alive. Edward did not care for his words. He felt sorry he did not capture Medea and acquire the caster class before regaining his freedom, but she was now dead under Gilgamesh's weapons, and there was nothing he could do. However, he had long taken over her bounded field, so nothing could stop him from leaving this place. A blue light enveloped Edward and Tosaka, disappearing from the temple. That was scary, sighed Tosaka. Was that the legendary King of Heroes? He's nothing like what I imagine. That's not the real Gilgamesh. What do you mean? He revived himself with the Grail in the previous war, explained Edward. But the corruption of the Grail still affected him by magnifying his greatest flaw, his pride. That explains a lot, nodded. Wait, what happened to Shiro and Saber? I teleported them home, replied Edward. Really? She looked at him suspiciously. Girl, don't question my character. I mean, I saved them. Edward rolled his eyes. Anyway, what I was more than anything was to see you pummel Shiro to the ground and win this war. But what's the point? I don't even have a servant, so I'm technically disqualified. I'm still a heroic spirit, and the war will continue until there is one of us left. By the way, did you kill Ryder? I did, and it was not as difficult as I imagined. Don't brag. If I didn't tell you her identity, you'd be lucky to be intact by the end of the fight. Tosaka immediately pouted after hearing this, but she could not argue against the truth. Saber must have won her fight, so that leaves me, her, Berserker, and Lancer, which is our next target. Lancer? Where is he? Tosaka looked around before pausing at the church. You don't mean? Yes, Kotomine Kaire is the last master of this war. I should have guessed as much. He never had a trustworthy face. There is more. What's with that look? Asked Tosaka, taking a small step back. Edward sighed before directly telling the truth. He's the person who killed your father in the previous war. That's impossible. He was my father's beloved apprentice. How could he kill him? Kotomine Kaire is a twisted man. He only does things that please him or soothe his urges. No, it can't be, yelled Tosaka, holding her head. Then, her eyes reddened. I'm going to kill him. Wait. We don't have much time as he has an alliance with Gilgamesh. So, if you can't deal with him as soon as possible, I will interfere. Fine. They rushed into the church, and Tosaka kicked it open. Kisei, who was praying, calmly stood up, turned around, and spoke softly. Why are you acting so aggressively? Did you kill my father? How did you find out? So, you won't even deny it. What's the point of doing such a pointless thing? I'm more interested in how you find the truth. I'm going to kill you. Tosaka rushed toward him, but a spear attacked her, forcing her to evade. Lancer, this is not a fight you should participate in, said Edward. So, are we finally going to continue our fight? Sadly, I want to end this as soon as possible. So, there will be no more fun fights. Edward activated his noble phantasm and disappeared from the room with Lancer, leaving a large black ball. A reality marble, uttered Kaire surprisingly as he looked at the ball. Now, it's only you and me, said Tosaka. Do you think you can defeat me? I'm the one who raised you. I am not the same person as you think I am. Tosaka activated her magic circuit and rushed forward. The battle hadn't begun for over 30 seconds when the black ball disappeared, and Edward only appeared. So fast, said Tosaka, who suddenly stopped. Kaire took this opportunity and kicked her ribs, sending her flying away. I guess I should not expect much from that loser, he commented while looking at Edward, who was reviewing the memory he stole from Lancer. He now knew where Scathatch was and how to reach her. We're running out of time, he said to Tosaka. Fine, you can help me kill him. Kaire immediately rushed to the door, trying to run away. Sadly, it was useless. With the two working together, he died in less than a minute despite his ability to teleport a short distance. Let's go. Edward teleported them away, and Gilgamesh returned to see Kaire's body not long after they left. He looked at it and said, despite how horrible of a human being you were, you are still my servant, and only I can kill you. He took the body and walked away. Tosaka's mansion. Wow, this was thrilling, said Tosaka. Sakura, where are you? You're back, said Sakura, walking into the room. How did things go? Is Shiro-senpai alright? You ask about him before asking about me, your sister. Well, you're obviously fine. I still want you to care about me, said Tosaka as she jumped on her and began to tickle her. Sakura laughed uncontrollably while begging to stop. No, this is your punishment. They laughed and played for a few minutes until they lay on the floor, head to head, panting and sweating. Why is it so quiet? Where is that bastard? I can hear you, yelled Edward. He's downstairs. Tosaka stood up and helped Sakura walk downstairs to see Edward watching television and enjoying a soda. What are you doing here? I didn't want to interrupt your bonding moment, explained Edward. Now that you're done, are you prepared to return to work? Tosaka sat on the sofa with her sister. Only Berserker and Saber are left. We can work with Shiro to take down Berserker. No, Berserker is the bait for my final fight with Gilgamesh. So, Saber must be eliminated next. But Shiro-senpai, we can eliminate Saber while keeping him alive. The important thing is to eliminate the servants. That's fair. We can start tomorrow. I'm tired. Tosaka dragged Sakura upstairs, and Edward glanced at her. Once they were gone, he waved his hand to manifest a weird weapon, Gilgamesh's EA. He used Shiro's projection magecraft, which he stole, and others to copy EA and create a fake version. He aims to study the real thing to prepare for his fight with Gilgamesh, and when he tries to recreate the real version, Tier 11. This could be considered a positive first step, thought Edward. 580 Fatal Flaw. Edward floated in the air with EA before him. He was enclosed in a box, and his body looked strange, often showing double. It was as if time was rapidly moving. He opened his eyes at dawn and exhaled before the sun fully set. The real EA should involve certain authorities, which complicates things given Akasha's existence. He did not know much about the use of authorities or rules in this universe, but he knew even if his natural body was here, he could not use his rules. And that's because Akasha, a way more powerful version of the universe will, does not allow anyone to meddle in the rules of this world, even if they meet the willpower requirement. According to Edward's theory, completing the rule involves interacting or accessing the root or Akasha's core, so true magics should involve the rules. Time passed, and everyone woke up. Edward approached them after Tosaka and Sakura had breakfast and were ready for school. A night has passed. You should be prepared to deal with Saber. Tosaka said nothing, so Edward explained, as long as 2 servants remain, Gilgamesh can forcefully summon the Grail. We don't have time for your indecisiveness. I'm not indecisive. I just did not want to say anything before her, said Tosaka, motioning to Sakura, who continued to eat her food with her head lowered. It's not like anything will happen to Shiro. He was never supposed to partake in this battle in the first place. Edward did go to school with them, but in the afternoon, he accompanied them to Shiro's house. They somehow agreed to an amiable fight and found a place to fight. Boom, boom, boom. Saber rushed in a zigzag pattern, trying to evade these energy blasts, but it was useless. They were fast and moved irregularly. Furthermore, Archer had surrounded the place with invisible magic traps. Saber suddenly felt something and moved to the right. The place where she was suddenly released a fire inferno. It was like a volcano erupting. Saber thought she had evaded this trap, but there was another. When she landed, vines came out of nowhere to bind her legs. She swiftly cut them with her swords, but Archer had already fired 2 golden energy beams. Her battle instinct activated, and she blacked one, but the other penetrated her armor. Why don't you forfeit and end this pointless fight, said Edward. Never, replied Saber, half kneeling on the floor and supporting herself with Excalibur. Archer, you don't need the Grail, so why are you continuing to fight? I need it to build me a real body. I know you can create a body on your own. It's not that simple. Winning the Grail is important to Edward because that's the only way he can become a full citizen of this world and not be restricted by Akasha. I thought you, of all people, should understand my desire. Your approach is wrong from the beginning, replied Edward. Your pursuit should have been the second true magic, which would have allowed travel between parallel dimensions. In this infinite cosmos, there is definitely a dimension where Camelot still exists or one where it's still in its infancy. You could have become an advisor to your younger self and prevented her from making the same mistake. Maybe you're right, or maybe it would not be the same if I walked that path, replied Saber, who slowly stood up. Regardless, now that I still have an opportunity, I won't miss it. Let's go, Excalibur. Saber's swords finally became visible before releasing an intense light. Edward calmly watched everything as a tear in the void appeared behind him, showing a massive cannon. The cannon fired intense light energy, blocking Saber's last desperate attack. Once everything subsided, Edward was intact, but Saber's armor was gone, and she had many injuries. She was barely holding on. Saber, yelled Shiro, rushing to her side. Master, I'm sorry. No, I should be the one apologizing. I was too weak to help. No, you did your best, and that's all that matters, replied Saber, her voice becoming weaker with each passing second. As she slowly dissipated, Saber remembered everything she experienced. Although this Grail was short, she still experienced warmth from her master. So, she dissipated with a smile on. Edward looked in the distance. There was only one last piece to gain true freedom while accomplishing his primary goal of coming to this world. He left with Tosaka while Sakura left to ensure her senpai was alright. A few days later, Edward became invisible with Tosaka to infiltrate the Einzyburn family. As they had expected, Gilgamesh attacked Ilya and Berserker. Ilya is a homunculus created to be the vessel of the Grail. So, Gilgamesh plans to kill Berserker and forcibly strip the Grail from her body. Edward had to be extra careful not to be detected by Gilgamesh's clairvoyant eyes. So, he used all his anti-divination and anti-detection spells to watch the battle from afar. Berserker was being massacred to save his master. His real identity was Hercules, and his noble phantasm prevented him from dying unless he was killed 12 times based on his 12 labors. Still, this ability was useless for Gilgamesh as he used his Gate of Babylon to bully Berserker. Even though the latter defied the odds and actually lived for a 13th life, it did not change the final outcome. Bang! A shield manifested to block the spear attacking Ilya. Then, a white light enveloped her, and she disappeared. Bastard! It's you again, growled Gilgamesh. Yes, and it's time to finish things between us. Edward appeared with Tosaka and Ilya. So, finally willing to face me? You're not going to run away again. Take care of her, he said to Tosaka before walking toward Gilgamesh. Tosaxi held his arm. You'll win, right? Of course, he replied, smiling before patting her head. He looked at his opponent. Netheril, it's time to shine again. He immediately activated his noble phantasm, encasing him and Gilgamesh into a reality marble. Is this the legendary Netheril? It's so much more beautiful than I anticipated, said Gilgamesh as he saw the beautiful city floating in the distance. I cannot wait for it to be mine. Edward did not say anything but activated the Golem legions, sending them to attack Gilgamesh and all the cannons in the city. Gilgamesh activated his Gate of Babylon to its highest ability, annihilating all the legions. He summoned a golden book, and with it in his hand, Gilgamesh began spamming powerful spells. However, he was soon outmatched because Edward could use a similar tactic as him with his mystic codes. Without hesitation, Gilgamesh summoned Ea and the Chains of Heaven. Ea released an energy wave that destroyed all the legions. Meanwhile, the chain headed to Edward, trying to seal them. An awakening, Ea? That's not enough, thought Edward. And I won't give you room to breathe. He released hundreds of spells to block the chains while the city continued a toggling battle with Ea. Then, he activated his final trump card, the Void Cannon. Boom! The cannon was powerful, but it was still insufficient to overwhelm Ea. Luckily, its job was to distract Gilgamesh. A chain suddenly appeared behind and pierced the King of Heroes' arm. The worst part is the thing contained an extremely powerful and vile curse to ensure he was immobilized. Release me, you mongrel, screamed Gilgamesh. You could have easily won this battle had you used Ea's full powers, said Edward. Unfortunately, your overinflated ego made you believe only one opponent was ever worthy of you using your full strength. Your old friend, Inkijo. Stop talking nonsense and release me. Edward ignored him. He used the floating city to cast the most powerful sealing spell he was capable of in this body to capture Ea and the Chains of Heaven. Then, he walked to Gilgamesh and ripped his eyes from their sockets. These would be perfect gifts for Luna, he muttered. 581 Akasha's true motive flame enveloped Gilgamesh, and he evaporated. Edward calmly saved the clairvoyant eyes before quickly stepping out of the reality marble. You won? Asked Tosaka. Of course, said Edward with a smile. You said you wanted to see the floating city? This is your chance. Really? Hurry up, we don't have much time. Keeping the reality marble functioning takes a lot of mana, and his current avatar cannot do so for very long. Edward looked at Ilya. You come to. Why? I need to remove the grail from your body without killing you. Is that possible? He's the Arcane Emperor. If someone can do it, it's him, said Tosaka, and Ilya finally agreed. Edward took them inside the reality marble to a lab in his floating city. He tasked a golem to give Tosaka a tour as he helped Ilya. Don't be scared, he reassured as she lay on a table with a magic circle drawn at the bottom. Although you're a homunculus born from natural birth, this does not change your genetic makeup's defects. As such, you would not live past 30, and that's not considering the burden the Grail has on your body and soul. Ilya, this child, looked calm despite hearing these devastating words. That's because she knew and was prepared for an early death. Such a brave child, sighed Edward. No children should live with death looming over their heads. After I remove the Grail, I will construct a normal and healthy body for you. I will also heal the injuries to your soul that the Grail caused. Ilya just nodded, so Edward asked, do you have any questions? Will it hurt? No, it will feel like a regular nap. With the state-of-the-art laboratory in the city, Edward can easily manage the pain. Okay, Edward immediately started. Ilya fell asleep, and soon after, an eerie aura in the shape of dark lightning emanated from her body. A golden cup tattered in a black goo slowly rose from her body, the corrupted Grail. With a wave of his hand, Edward led the Grail to another room. Meanwhile, Ilya's body disintegrated before being rebuilt just the way it was. From now on, she will be just an ordinary girl. Edward was rapidly analyzing the Grail. The thing was a large mana source and contained the magic of wish-granting. Edward and the Empire have studied wish-granting magic, which they found in relics of the Lemurian civilization. There were two conclusions about this type of magic. The first one was that higher dimensional beings, including gods and Krona, were the ones granting the wish, and the other was wish-granting spells was a form of pure reality manipulation. With his knowledge, Edward started to work. He isolated the corruption from the Grail, learning from Gilgamesh's mistake and ensuring his personality was not secretly affected. Then, with the immense mana and its ability to grant wishes, Edward broke his limitations as a servant/heroic spirit and finally acquired a natural body. Still nothing compared to the main body, but better than being a spirit, commented Edward, who felt a lot of restrictions had been removed from him. The Grail dispersed, and he did not interfere. He then cancelled the reality marble, and the three returned to Ilya's mansion. That was more exciting than I thought, said Tosaka. Couldn't you wait longer? Even with a new body, I don't have the mana to keep such a noble phantasm going for so long, replied Edward. So, you've succeeded. Of course, he replied before looking at Ilya. Do you want to stay with your brother? Can I? I'm sure he would love that. Although Edward does not like Shiro, he knows he would do his best to care for his adopted sister, even risking his life to ensure her safety. So, he took her to Shiro's house and explained their relationship. I didn't think you could do anything nice for Shiro, commented Tosaka after they returned home. I did it for Ilya, he replied. He would have revived her mother if it were up to him because she deserved better than what happened in Fate/Zero. However, Edward did not want to face the complications of finding her soul in this complicated world. If you say so. So, what's next? Asked Tosaka. I'll keep my word and teach you magic. I also need to borrow your mansion's basement for research. After that, I should leave. You're leaving. Although it will take some time. Yes, nodded Edward, looking in the distance. The room suddenly became somber until Edward talked again. Don't you have to report to the clock tower that you're the final winner? I don't have to, but I must. This is a perfect opportunity to increase the influence of the Tosaka clan. You can tell them that your wish was to increase your strength and show them your new magic circuit. That's a good idea. Tosaka left for the clock tower, the Mage Association's headquarters. Meanwhile, Edward turned the mansion's basement into a bounded field for his research. His floating city cannot exist without the reality marble, which takes too much mana. So, he had to build a new laboratory to study EA and the chains of heaven. 3 days later, Tosaka returned and headed for the basement. Done? Edward asked as he put the final touch on the lab. Yeah, the Tosaka clan is officially one of the most powerful magic families in the world. Edward nodded but did not comment, knowing that this title meant very little since this world was complex and full of hidden secrets. I'm guessing all these families wanted to marry you, he said, adding a new enchantment. I bet some were even willing to allow their clan members to marry into the Tosaka clan as long as you agree to give your second child to them. Tosaka's mouth twitched. Yeah, and they were insufferable. You should be more careful when dealing with these people. Some desperate families will do anything to ensure a talented successor. I know, she replied with gritted teeth. So, someone already tried. They put something in my drink. I almost beat them to a pulp, said Tosaka. At least you displayed your true power, that should scare most people. True. All right, let's get started with the training, said Edward. While teaching you arcane rune, I will also train you on controlling mana. It pains me every time I watch you cast a spell. It's not that bad. I have prepared a virtual reality helmet for you and the necessary potions. Don't expect much sleep in the following months. We don't have much time and plenty to learn. Tosaka suddenly paused before walking to the designated machine. The training lasted 3 months before Edward agreed she was an accepted mage. However, in the first month, she did not sleep a wink or eat, surviving only on potion. Luckily, in the second month, he allowed her to attend school and live a normal life. Edward looked at his findings and could not help but frown. He had made the right decision to come to this world just because of the existence of the Chain of Heaven. This artifact was an anti-divinity weapon, just like Asta's magic was anti-magic. Furthermore, the thing had almost no limit. Edward hadn't found it. The stronger a god, the more binding its effect was. With it, he was confident to at least imprison the Time Guardian if he could catch him off guard. However, he has not entirely reverse-engineered this artifact yet and does not know whether he could leave this world with it. EA was the weapon of destruction he believed it was, and like the chain, he's missing one final piece to build his own. He must find the root, and the only way to do so is through the true magics. So, that's how it is, thought Edward. Akasha allowed me to enter this world because it wants me to create the 6th true magic, adding more possibilities to this universe. No, if I think from a larger perspective, maybe Akash already knows of the war and wishes to prepare her world for the upcoming chaos. 582 The 6th true magic. After figuring out his next step, Edward started to ponder how to create the 6th true magic and what kind it should be. After considering a few ideas, a thought suddenly popped into his mind. I can try to do something based on Morgana, he muttered. He missed the little elf, her constant chatter, weird personality, and how easy she made his life. My real body is already improving her main processor by fusing it with the Speed Force. Maybe my research here could help the process, thought Edward, who found this identity more appealing with each passing second. If I want to finish this as soon as possible, I need a sample. Edward had an idea, but there might be some danger involved. However, considering he had EA, he felt it was worth it. So, he went to see Tosaka. You want me to recreate my family's jeweled sword? Yes. Why? What do you mean why? Don't you want to recreate one of your family's lost legacy? I do, but knowing you, there must be another reason you're suddenly interested. Fair enough. You only need to know your success will summon someone, and I need to talk to that person. Tosaka stared at him briefly before accepting. They headed to the clock tower to begin working on the sword, and just as Shiro helped in the other timeline, Edward used his magic to help her finish the sword. As expected, Zelrich, owner of the second magic, showed up once it finished. He invented jewel magic and passed it on to one of the Tosaka's ancestors. Arcane Emperor, I wanted to see you. You know me? Asked Edward. I've been observing this timeline, said Zelrich. Humanity was saved once I created the second magic as I imbued them with endless possibility. If this timeline fails and humans die, there are other choices. But you, who suddenly popped out of nowhere, imbued them with endless possibilities for success and prosperity. So, that's why Akasha created a background for the Arcane Empire to give the humans of this world a greater future. I may be more right than I believed. She's preparing for the upcoming war, thought Edward. Our conversation can wait since I'm sure you have things to say to her. Thanks for your understanding, said Zelrich. As Edward gave him the room, he talked to Tosaka. A few minutes later, Edward returned since they called him. Is something wrong? I want to take her as a pupil, but she told me to ask you. That's a good idea, said Edward before glancing at Tosaka. Why are you hesitating? But, Edward sighed, you know I can't stay, and Zelrich, as the owner of the second magic and teacher to your ancestor, is the perfect teacher for you. I understand. I can't believe someone is reluctant to learn from me. Well, considering the competition, I guess that makes sense, said Zelrich. Give us a moment. Tosaka left the room, leaving the two. So, what can I help you with? I'm designing the 6th true magic and want to see yours first for research. Passing on any true magic is not a simple. I'm not asking you to teach me but to show me. For someone like you, is there a difference? Rebutted Zelrich. You, of all people, should understand better than anyone the importance of this magic. So, name your price. I want the design for Netheril. You're asking too steep of a price for just showing me the second magic. Choose something else. Fine, how about the blueprint for the ether core? You seem to know a lot about my floating city. I am the observer of countless timelines. What do you expect? So, do we have a deal? We have a deal. Edward immediately sent the blueprint to him. Of course, he did not show the latest model. Zelrich then cast the second magic, Kaleidoscope. With this spell, Edward saw the operation of myriad timelines, including the one with his arcane empire. He also saw how this magic involved rewriting the world, influencing or rewriting records. This true magic does involve the rules and even combined many of them, analyzed Edward. More importantly, it seems to grant its wield a certain authority or privilege in the world. In Edward's eyes, the owner of these true magics seemed to be like the GM in a game with powers or authority to modify the game or the world as they saw fit. Did that help? Yes, and thank you, nodded Edward before leaving. Who are you, Arcane Emperor? Muttered Zelrich before meeting with Tosaka. They agreed on a designated time before beginning their training. Meanwhile, Edward immediately started working on his magic. He took this opportunity to analyze the anti-life equation to further his understanding of the mind rule, and he added the knowledge rule, soul rule, and others to create the 6th true magic, nigh omniscient. Let's try this thing out. Edward immediately cast the spell, and his mind left his body, entering a higher plane where all records and knowledge exist the root. So, it did work, he muttered calmly. Reaching the root is the goal or ambition of all mages, but he was relatively calm about the entire thing. I wonder what the relationship of this world is with the Akashic records. He knew there must be some connections but did not know exactly. Forget about that for now, said Edward. He left a special rune in the root before leaving. Once his mind returned to his body, Edward found out he had turned into a human computer with access to endless knowledge. Anything he wanted to know, he would get the knowledge or answer from the root. And if he did not know, he could calculate or deduce the answer from abundant data. The only downside is this thing puts heavy pressure on my soul, he complained. He expected this spell to have limitations but did not expect it to be so severe. Let's finish our main objective. He immediately used his new spell to analyze EA and the chains of heaven. He discovered that EA drew power from a primal source of power that existed once the universe was born. That power contains the power of creation and destruction, meaning it can revert the multiverse to its genesis state or recreate it. All worlds have a period of genesis or before the Big Bang. If I can tap into it, I should be able to create a tier 11 weapon, muttered Edward, who focused on the chains of heavens. It worked similarly to EA, with the idea that all divine being originated from a source. Since the chains are made from that source, they can restrain all gods. Very well. Cosmos, you wait for my return. Edward was still unsure whether to pass the time game, so he needed to travel to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. However, during his stay in the world, he will prepare to deal with that bastard who dares to label him as a criminal. Let's see who will judge who, he sneered. Edward spent more than 3 years on this project, but most of the time, he stayed inside the lab and saw Tosaka and Sakura a few times. Now that he was done, he only had a few things to do before leaving. His next step is to see Scat hatch. He realized the root had no knowledge about primordial runes, and there were few reasons he could think of to explain this situation. Scathatch or Odin removed the knowledge from the roots, or the root itself purged the knowledge from his records to prevent it from spreading. A few magicians have taken things from the root so it can hide things from its people. Regardless of the reason, he wanted answers. 583. Primordial Rune's Secret Void. Edward, who focused on creating the Speed Force and upgrading Morgana's processors, suddenly stopped as he received a message from the Akashic records. Did something happen? Asked the little elf, so Edward explained as he opened the mail. Not just one but 2 messages, thought Edward. Dear Sir Edward Bones. Thank you for succeeding in the hidden mission, creating a true magic. Reward, 3 invitations of your choosing to become members of our records. Hidden mission? So, there is a connection between these two, muttered Edward. The real question is how many people have passed this mission? How many true magic do they have access to? Said Morgana. This thing is above our pay grade, but this reward is worth it. Bellatrix took on the job of doing missions for Akashic records to get everyone tokens to become members. But with this reward, her workload will drastically decrease, and Edward will feel less guilty for not going with her. Send the news to Bella, he ordered before checking the second message. First, he learned his Arcane Emperor title had been upgraded, which increased his charm ability and the suppression he could release. Second, he received 2 new titles, one of which caught his attention. True Magician, you have developed magic to the point of reaching its fundamental essence. Reward, increase affinity with laws/rules/authority. Do you want to accept? Interesting, they actually ask instead of directly giving me the talent, muttered Edward before accepting and closing his eyes. As expected, a character suddenly appeared in his soul flame, and he sensed his mind becoming clearer. He felt that it was easier to control his rules, and even understanding them became simpler. Not a bad talent, he nodded before focusing on the second title. Legend, your name and accomplishments as the Arcane Emperor have been spread to many worlds. Reward, 5% increase in the speed at which your myth and legends are spread. Edward felt this title was very important but did not know precisely why. This might be related to how to reach tiers beyond 11, commented Morgana, and he agreed. Edward then accepted this new title before returning to his work. Nasuverse, Earth. Edward teleported to his next destination, the Land of Shadows. He knew the rough locations from Siu Kulane's memories and his true magic, so it did not take him long to reach the destination described as outside the world. As soon as he arrived, Edward found countless ghosts rushing toward him, but his body released a golden light that isolated these creatures, preventing them from getting close. He then noticed a beautiful young woman with purple hair, red eyes, a perfect body, and tight clothes that displayed her curves. You have finally returned, said Scathatch with bright eyes. Edward sighed, I'm guessing you've met me before. You don't remember. No. Scathatch paused. Well, you did say in the next meeting you might be different. I don't care about this as long as you plan to keep your promise. Which is, take me from this place, give me a life of purpose. That's not a problem since that was my objective in the first place, nodded Edward. Did I say anything else? You said when you return, I must teach you primordial runes. Edward's lips twitched. It seems that this version of himself in this world has the same personality. Do you plan on keeping your word? Why not? Scathatch invited him to the only pavilion in this ghastly place. She served tea, which one would not expect to be present in such a place. Let's start by telling me what you know. I learn a little from your apprentice but have some reservations. In my opinion, primordial runes should be way more powerful, said Edward before displaying what he knew and understood. You're correct, nodded Scathatch. What you've learned can only be classified as subrunes. Subrunes? Are you saying they can be combined together to form the real primordial runes? You catch on quick, smiled Scathatch before demonstrating. She combined many subrunes, HP ancient runes, into a primordial rune. Edward saw the final result, and his eyes marveled at the complexity of this simple. Although it doesn't look like the primordial runes back home, its essence feels the same, thought Edward. Is there a limit to how many primordial runes there are, or can each concept in the world be represented by one? There are 81 primordial runes. Edward pondered. He had long theorized that primordial runes might manifest differently in different universes. How many do you know? 80. Only Odin knows all of them, replied Scathatch. It seems I might have to get the last one from Odin, thought Edward. Can you teach me all of them? No problem, but you still haven't told me where you're taking me. The Arcane Empire. Wasn't it destroyed? Did you rebuild it? The one destroyed was nothing but a branch, explained Edward. The real one exists in another universe or dimension completely separated from this one. Some things are starting to make sense now, said Scathatch. After getting to know each other, when he first meets Edward, the latter mentions that his empire is about to be destroyed. However, he seems too calm about the ordeal, more sad that the gods will be responsible for their downfall. And what role will I play in the empire? Asked Scathatch. Anything you want, replied Edward. You seem to love teaching, so you can be a university professor or a trainer in the army. You were once a queen, so you can rebuild your kingdom in another plane. You were once a conqueror and killer, so if you wish, you can also go on expeditions in other realms to fight and kill. Hey, don't just mention a girl's dark past like that, said Scathatch, making Edward smile. I'm saying you have plenty of options, even being a regular citizen. More importantly, there will be no one to judge and many like-minded individuals. People will not fear your talent or ability but praise you instead. That sounds like a wonderful place. It is, but like all things, it also has its downside, explained Edward. No place is perfect, nodded Scathatch. Then, they had a long conversation, and Edward learned all her primordial runes. With the help of the sixth true magic, the process was much faster. He also learned why he did not find the knowledge in the roots or from Siu Kulane's mind. Primordial runes cannot be recorded and must be passed on from one person to another through word of mouth. The fact he successfully took some of it from Siu Kulane's mind was a feat in itself. Once the tutoring session ended, it was Edward's turn. He contacted his main body and sent Scathatch and the Land of Shadow to the floating city outside in the void. Edward expected some reactions from Akasha, but nothing happened. Scathatch had already learned about arcane runes, so it would be easier for her to adapt to the Empire after a few lessons. However, he also hid some things from her, like the existence of the void and omniversal travel. However, he reckoned she would figure it out after she reached the Empire and learned many things. Once that ordeal ended, Edward returned to Earth to check on Tosaka, Sakura, and Ilya before traveling to the moon. 584 Inheritor. After reaching the moon, Edward began observing and analyzing. From what he remembered from the Nasuverse, the moon was a supercomputer called the Moon Cell created by an alien civilization with a database on PAR with the root. However, after analyzing the thing, he discovered it was a regular moon. It seems I have to reach another timeline, he muttered before leaving, returning to Tosaka's mansion. You're back already? Asked Tosaka. He said goodbye to them an hour ago and might not return for a few months. Did something happen? Something urgent happened, and I might need to leave early, replied Edward, who took out a blue gem. I wanted to do this in case I didn't have a chance. What is this? Tosaka, despite her reluctance, had accepted that he would leave and not return. This gem will grant you control of the sixth true magic after I leave. It's my final gift to you. Are you serious? I don't need to lie about that. But, don't you need it? Asked Tosaka. I'm going to a faraway place, and this thing is useless to me. Can I go with you? Unfortunately, that's not possible, replied Edward. His relationship with Akasha is purely business. She allowed him to enter and do things. In exchange, he provided her universe with more possibilities. However, Edward cannot take people with him. Scathatch is an exception because the world has rejected her existence, so she has to live in the land of shadows. I see. Will I see you again? Maybe. What's with the hesitation? Are you going to die? Asked Tosaka hurriedly. No, but the world is about to enter a terrible period, sighed Edward. If we can survive the initial chaos, we might have a chance to meet again. What do you mean by that? Tosaka found those words ominous. She knew how powerful the Arcane Emperor was, and he had said he might not survive. That's all I can say for now. I'm giving you this magic to increase your chances of survival, explained Edward. Oh, and one last thing, I still need to use the true magic for a while. So, when the gem lights blue, you truly inherit its power. It will also mean you've left, she added. Edward looked her in the eyes. I don't have any children of my own except for an adopted daughter. He smiled as he remembered the kind and mischievous Charmy. Edward walked to her side. You can be considered the second child I've adopted. I'm not your daughter, said Tosaka, tears streaming down her face and snot in her nose. Edward hugged her before kissing her forehead. I hope we meet again. He disappeared, leaving Tosaka bawling on the floor. Edward's destination was the Fate/X timeline, where the moon cell was first revealed. He realized it was way more complicated to travel between timelines than any other world he'd been to. The process could be described as harsh. That was understandable as even Zelrich, who controls a true magic involving accessing parallel worlds, needs to use jewels in whatever dimensions he wishes to travel to form a body for him. Meanwhile, Edward was doing the same, bringing his entire flesh and blood. When he reached his destination, his body was in shambles and needed a few days to repair. His plan worked effortlessly, as he soon found the secrets of the moon cell. In this timeline, people have tried to hack or access the moon cell through many methods, most communicating with the mind or soul. Edward went directly to the core of this supercomputer, accessing all its data. The moon cell existed before the Earth was formed, meaning more than 4.5 billion years ago. More importantly, the moon cell has been recording data from Earth by scanning the planet every nanosecond for the past billion years. As such, they contained all records or information about Earth, its people, history, magic, and civilization just like Akasha. Edward could not or dare not get all the information from the root in case something happened, but he had no hesitation in doing the same for the moon cell. He downloaded and stored all the data from the moon cell while using his sixth true magic to sift through it rapidly and found the most useful. There is enough data to build Throne of Heroes based on the power of myth. After years of studying the spiritual dimension in Black Clover, the data he gathered in Naruto, and the information from the moon cell, Edward finally knew he could create his own Throne of Heroes and Myths. Without hesitation, he spent the next few months adding the finishing touch to that project and completing it. Now, he only needed to build it back home. However, no information on the primordial runes or divine words magic, muttered Edward, who recently became very interested in divine words magic of this world. From the knowledge he acquired from the root, he realized the gods of this world were even more perfect than Diana. They were divine, meaning they were immortal, could use the power of faith, and had their own authority. However, these gods did not use divine energy but mana. As such, his theory is that divine word magic is a unique magical system that can be used by both mana and divine energy. For our next stop, we might be able to find both what I want, muttered Edward, who collected a few things before heading to his destination. He was not about to hop to another parallel timeline. No, his next destination was back in time to see the Arcane Empire. The Arcane Empire existed in a unique time span. It existed after Gilgamesh separated the gods from man, 2600 BC, and before the Age of Man, 0 AD. During that period, mystery was rapidly declining while the laws of physics and science were rapidly taking shape due to the collective minds of man. Edward cast a spell, opening a spacetime tunnel to his destination. The channel was a bit unsteady, so he added 2 primordial runes to stabilize it. However, as he was about to step it, he sensed a summoning from a specific spacetime coordinate. Is this? He sensed something and did not hesitate to respond to the summon. A blinding white light swallowed him, and when he opened his eyes, he found himself in the middle of a summoning circle. He looked around and saw someone in white mage clothes smiling at him. I figured it would be you, he said, looking at this person with the same face and dress as him. So, are you me? Yes and no, replied Fate Edward. You're a variant but somehow different. Yes, unlike your variants with different personalities, memories, and experiences, I am the same as you in almost every way. However, I exist for only one purpose: spread your legend. You seem rather too accepting of your destiny. Fate Edward shrugged. Akasha created me too well. I know I cannot resist, so I can only accept my fate. Is Akasha so powerful? Akasha herself might not be much, but the person controlling or creating her, that's another story. Edward's eyes squinted. Give me a rough estimate. Between tier 12 to 14. I never expected that, he sighed. So, why did you bring me here? If I remember correctly, tomorrow is the day you die. I summon you to give you a few things and, hopefully, shorten your trip in this world. Is this Akasha's way of saying I'm no longer welcome? Asked Edward. You can say that. Follow me. Can I ask you a question? Do you want to know whether our queens exist in this reality? Asked Fate Edward. Yes, they do, and they don't, he replied. Their possibilities exist in this world as part of your legend, but the real variant won't exist until they visit this world. Do you recommend I send them here? Asked Edward with a frown. I do. They should come and attempt to create a true magic before leaving. It will benefit them in the long run. How do I know you're not a pawn of Akasha to lure my family into this world? This is merely a suggestion, said Fate Edward calmly. You can gather more information before making an informed decision. True. We're here, said Fate Edward, showing them a few gems lying on a table. 585. Luck / Fate Edward took the first gem and said, this is the last primordial runes from Odin. Something tells me it was not easy to acquire. You're right. That bastard is cunning, and I had to pay a lot to get it. Did you know he wanted me to marry into his family? Does he even have a daughter? Many, all illegitimate. That makes sense, nodded Edward. Fate Edward took out the second gem. This one contains a deeper analysis of the Fates magecraft and other magics. I figured it might help make slight improvements to our arcane rune magic. I had this thought. This one is for the divine word magic. I figure you would be interested. Oh, so were my conjectures correct? Yes, it can be used for divine energy and mana. Did it help create a vessel that perfectly contains divine energy and mana? This project has been going on for a while, and the highest achievement was sealing these two opposite energies in the body and unsealing one when needed to change. They could not be used together, let alone fuse. I didn't get to it yet, replied Fate Edward with a deep sigh. What's wrong? This experiment is why I will die tomorrow. I thought it was because the gods were dissatisfied with how humans were becoming. That's true, but they were willing to tolerate my existence because they knew how much they would have to pay to eliminate me and the Empire, explained Fate Edward. But everything changed while I experimented with divine energy. These gods knew this energy was perfectly suited to them and wanted it. I refuse, but this was the catalyst to band together and eliminate me at all costs. No matter how evolved and powerful a creature is, it cannot escape its basic instinct, like greed or desire, sighed Edward. A sad truth. The good news is everything they did was for nothing. Fate Edward sneered after hearing these words. As his counterpart said, he would die before allowing these gods to get his hands on his research. He already had to kill a few people close to him who betrayed him because of the promises and seduction of these gods. Let's not mention this, said Fate Edward. This gem is about soul divinity. Oh, you succeeded. Yes, and it solves so many of our issues. The soul limit, asked Edward. That's right. Your thinking was in the wrong direction. You thought that increasing the connection between the flame and the soul could nourish the knowledge ring and break the limit, but you needed to fuse them. Read chapter 546 for a refresher on soul limit experiments. I never thought about fusion because the gods will separate their flame and use it to revive. I thought if they fuse, we would lose on another method of immortality, explained Edward. I thought the same until I chose to experiment, said Fate Edward. They will fuse, but another soul flame will condense due to the correlation between the flame and the soul. Then, to achieve divinity, you must repeat the process, but add willpower and the nourishment of the rules. So, our theory was correct. Higher tier will require that our soul dimension create laws/rules/authority instead of relying on the outside universe and willpower, just like in many cultivation novels. Edward cannot use his rules in the void unless they are stored in an artifact, and if he entered a world whose willpower requirement was 10, he would face the same issue. However, he theorized this would change at higher tiers. Exactly. Talking to another version of himself was very satisfying because of how in sync they were. Edward held the gem in his hand and sighed. He now had a universal method of breaking the soul limit, meaning he could increase his strength and reach tier 10 as soon as possible. Then, he only needs to complete his research on tier 11 before reaching that level. By the way, you will need a lot of soul energy to achieve soul divinity, Fate Edward warned. I know what to do, nodded Edward. Then, for the next few hours, they talked about magic, which was interesting. It's time, said Fate Edward, looking in the distance. You're too calm for what's about to happen. Edward was not afraid of death, but he did not think he could easily accept watching everything he had built crumble in one day. I have my way of coping, replied Fate. Do I even want to know? You don't, he said with a smile. Then, he calmly left the room. He watched the final battle of his favorite variant, and the experience was hard to describe. Watching how these gods destroyed the Arcane Empire was like seeing a warning of his future. He will face the same fate in his universe if things go wrong for him. A ruthless light flashed in his eyes as he thought, this will not be my fate. All these gods will either die at my hands or kneel before me, and the first one will be Cosmos. He disappeared from this world, returning to the city in the void. In another timeline, Tosaka sensed something and took out the gem. As she saw it change color, a new power and knowledge entered her mind, but she couldn't care less. Tears started to flow down from her eyes before she started bawling. Sakura heard her sister and rushed, asking what was wrong. He's gone, she said, and Sakura immediately understood. Void. Edward received his clone and fused with it, inheriting all his experiences, memories, and knowledge. He smiled because he realized how much work he had to do. Firstly, the knowledge about the sixth true magic was useful for updating Morgana's core. Additionally, the Avatar brought information about a material called photonic crystals, which were used to create the moon cell. After being magically enhanced, they would be perfect materials for a few parts in the upgrade, reducing the time and money used. Afterward, he needed to learn Divine Words magic, upgrade the arcane rune system, break his soul limit and achieve soul divinity, reach tier 10, and make EA and Chains of Heavens. A lot of work to do, muttered Edward. Do you want to stay or leave now? Asked Morgana. We are temporarily safe, so let me learn everything I need to so we can immediately start building once we reach the MCU. Edward then spent some time absorbing all the Avatar's knowledge and the things he did not have a chance to learn. Finally, the city flew to its next destination. Bang, bang, what now? Asked Edward with an ugly expression while trying to keep his balance. An unknown shockwave hit our ship, disturbing our flight. It's official, thought Edward. There has been an accident ever since he started this voyage. Now, he can say for sure his luck had run out after using the luck potion too often. What's the situation? We will use an emergency landing. We're lucky that we upgraded the navigation system, or we would be in serious trouble. Be prepared, as things could get rough. Morgana executed all the necessary protocols to ensure they arrived at their destination as soon as possible. Phew, we've arrived? No. The ship started to shake violently again. What is it now? We've landed, but it seems to be in an area where two entities are fighting. Energy recording has indicated levels beyond the theoretically calculated tier 11. Edward or the Empire had never encountered a tier 11 entity, besides Krona. So, they had no measurement and could only predict certain things. Edward resisted the urge to curse. What's the plan? The ship has already suffered damage and won't last long. So, we will use the emergency exit plan. Fine, but don't forget Albion. Despite everything, he would not let something happen to that stupid dragon. Ready? Asked Morgana. Go. A void energy shield surrounded Edward, and he flew away from the floating city. Something hit his shield, and he immediately passed out. Edward found himself in a fog, trying to navigate and leave. Finally, he succeeded, and his eyes opened. Where am I? He checked his body, which was perfectly intact, the same for his mana, aura, and soul, except his mind was a little foggy. He looked around, and everything was bright. Is this a lab room? He said, looking at the room. He was not restrained, but the table he was on was a medical table he often used when he was young. You're awake. Edward looked in the direction of the voice. 586 offer. Edward looked in the direction of the voice and saw a beautiful woman behind a glass. He immediately felt she looked familiar, but his mind and memory were still a little chaotic, making it harder for him to recognize. If I remember correctly, she's Aisha, the great-grandmother of Kamala Khan, who became Ms. Marvels. How did I get in contact with her? Thought Edward. Who are you? Asked Edward, slowly rising. His body was fine, but he had a slight headache. So, you can speak English? And your accent, that's British, said Aisha. Aisha, you haven't answered my question. You can call me Alicia. That's a lie. And how would you know? I just do. So, you have the ability to detect lies? Can you read my heartbeat, or is it something else? Asked Aisha. You're a weird person. You obviously know I'm dangerous, and any effort to restrain or deal with me is useless, yet you cannot resist your curiosity. Why is that? Asked Edward. Aisha was silent for a few minutes. My name is Aisha. Now, we're getting somewhere, said Edward with a smile. He walked out of the room to where Aisha was outside of the glass door of this laboratory/abandoned warehouse. What year is it? Is it still the 1940s? No, it's 2002. After hearing this news, Edward frowned. Then, how did you and I meet? Aisha hesitated briefly before telling the truth. It was the year 1947 during the Indian partition. I was dying on the floor due to a stabbed wound when your body suddenly crashed near me. Oddly, though, no one except me could see you. Edward listened tentatively. Your body released an energy that healed me, and I have been caring for your body since then. Just caring. All right, I admit I tried to understand what you were, but your skin was impregnable, and a shield would appear to protect you every time you were in danger. Danger. Some people came to know of your existence and wished to acquire you. Who are those people? The clandestine, replied Aisha with a sigh. Do they think my body was the key to unlocking their powers and returning to the Noor dimension? How do you know? I just do. You're right. Are they wrong? I don't know about the returning home part, but the energy released from your body did activate my Noor. Aisha constructed a fist made of light as a demonstration. Interesting power, commented Edward, observing this strange power/energy known as Noor. You said some people were after me, meaning more than one. Yes. A few organizations, including S.H.I.E.L.D., have been on my tail over the years. Is that why you never met your family? Asked Edward, making Aisha pause. Yes. I wanted them to live a happy and peaceful life, and my presence would not allow that. She had to watch her husband die, and her daughter turned into an old woman while she remained the same due to the activation of her power. However, she did not regret her actions as long as they lived a long and fulfilling life. I'm sorry for all the trouble I caused you, Edward sighed. He guessed this was Morgana's doing to ensure nothing happened to him. She probably used a powerful spiritual hint spell on the woman to ensure she never abandoned him. And I promise to repay you once I've calmed down. It's fine, said Aisha. I only want two things, to know who or what you are and whether you can return me home. I'm like you, someone from another dimension, replied Edward, looking her in the eyes. And yes, I can return you home. Really, I do not need to lie to you. True, nodded Aisha, feeling relief, joy, sadness, and regret at the thought of returning home. Do you have a place I can rest? Come with me. Edward followed her to a car, and they drove silently to a secure location. During the drive, he tried to contact Morgana. Are you all right? I'm fine, just injured, she replied weakly. Don't worry. I will heal you as fast as possible. It pained him to see her so feeble, especially since he was to blame. After arriving at their destination, Aisha told him he could use the guest room, and Edward thanked him. Then, he was finally alone, and he looked in the room's corner. I believe you've seen enough. The space broke like a mirror, and a bald woman in a yellow robe with a necklace walked out. I have tried to overestimate your ability, but you still surprise me. Hello, Sorcerer Supreme, said Edward, looking her up and down and assessing her strength. As a sorcerer, the only energy in her body was her life energy, meaning she looked like an ordinary person. However, from the What If show, she once made a tier 10 feat by splitting an entire timeline in the 4th episode. In other words, her strength fluctuated between tier 0 and tier 10. According to Edward's analysis, she was not the only one experiencing such a large fluctuation. A knife or bullet could probably kill the Scarlet Witch, but she destroyed the Mind Soul, a tier 10 item. She successfully destroyed the Dark Hold across every timeline, which is a tier 11 feat. Thor's strength fluctuates between tier 3 and tier 5, but he tanked a blast from a neutron star, a tier 7 feat. Because of this fluctuation, it was difficult to determine certain individuals' strengths in this world. You know me? Asked the Ancient One. I think you should be famous in the world of magic and mysticism. Is that so? She muttered. Something tells me you've been watching me since I landed on Earth in 1947. I have, she replied directly. So, why have you not acted? Asked Edward, interested in the answer. Earth is protected from any dimensional invaders, yet there are people, like your friend Aisha, who successfully enter. Do you know why? Cause and effect, replied Edward. These people will eventually have a positive effect on Earth, so their presence is allowed. Yes, that's the brilliance of the protection Agamotto left Earth, nodded the Ancient One. Since you can enter, the Earth must need you in some capacity. Edward grunted under his breath, deciding not to comment on these words. So, to what do I owe this visit? Something tells me you did not come just to observe me. I have an offer for you, said the Ancient One. Which is, become the Sorcerer Supreme. Edward looked at her, his mouth slightly opened. I have to admit I did not expect this. He thought of many possibilities, but this. Why, you are the perfect fit. That's not a good reason, especially since I am a foreigner, and you do not know anything about me. The Ancient One paused briefly. I have never been able to see past the year 2016, which is my death, until you showed up. She sighed deeply. I saw the future, and it's bleak. After trying countless possibilities, the only way I found to protect this Earth and this timeline is by making you the Sorcerer Supreme. What exactly did you see? Asked Edward with a frown. He did not think the events of Endgame or any variants of it would scare her. You'll know if you accept my offer. Edward wanted to roll his eyes. What happens if I refuse? I'll banish you from entering Earth. Isn't that a little harsh? The amount of energy inside your body is so immense that even if a small portion leaks, the planet will be destroyed. Now that you're conscious, I cannot take the risk. You don't trust me, but you want me to become the Sorcerer Supreme, said Edward. How does that work? You must take a binding oath to become the Sorcerer Supreme, the Ancient One explained. By then, I will be reassured. Edward grunted. He had come to this place to learn Karmatage magic and even get his hands on the Time Stone, but he had to weigh the gains and losses. Do you understand what it means for me to be the Sorcerer Supreme? I'm the kind of person that does whatever is necessary to achieve the goal. That's why I chose you, replied the Ancient One. We need this kind of ruthlessness and cruelty to survive what's coming. You seem to know me, said Edward. I talked to a potential future of yourself. For the first time in her life, the Ancient One encountered an anomaly while trying to see a person's future as that person noticed her actions and talked with her across time. I see, said Edward, guessing what had happened. He was tempted by the offer, mostly because of the Akashic record title of Sorcerer Supreme and since it was the fastest way to get his hands on the Time Stone. Lastly, this world was his training ground for the upcoming war, so he's prepared to challenge himself. Tell me the binding oath I must make. No problem, the Ancient One told him the oath she prepared. It was nothing harsh, mostly about taking his position seriously, not succumbing to foreign dimensional beings, and not abandoning his positions when things get difficult. Give me 3 days, and I'll give you an answer, said Edward. As you wish. 587 Nor energy. Now that he was alone with his thoughts, Edward found himself at a crossroads, his decision to accept the Ancient One's offer looming large. The gravity of the situation was not lost on him, and he leaned towards acceptance for many reasons. First, Earth is the center of most events in this world, and if he were banned, it would be very challenging for him to gain any benefits. Second, the position has benefits, such as the Time Stone and the Supreme Sorcerer title. Yet, the most compelling reason for Edward's inclination towards acceptance was the urgent need for a legal identity in this universe. His past experiences in Fate and the tumultuous entry into this world had made it clear to him that this realm, with its fusion with the comic world, held a much higher power ceiling than his home. As such, his entry into this universe will not go unnoticed. In the comics, the Supreme Sorcerer was a position acknowledged by eternity, an abstract entity that embodies the Marvel Universe and the personification of time. If I become the Sorcerer Supreme and am restricted by an oath, then these top entities might be more lenient on my actions if they take notice of me, analyzed Edward. Those are the pros, but there is also a con. I would be stuck in this world and cannot run away until I exhaust all my abilities. He frowned before realizing the choice was obvious. He came to this world to train for the upcoming war, and in that war, he would not be able to run no matter what. Since I need to push myself, why hesitate? Edward immediately decided to accept the position, but he would wait 3 days to give her his answer. So, he began checking his body. My body, soul, and mana are fine, but my mind is still a little bit chaotic, thought Edward. His body did not have to adapt to this world, or it was possible he already adapted after decades in a coma state. He raised his hand to summon a weird power but failed. I cannot control any rules. It seems the willpower level of this world is the highest 10. Edward frowned as his willpower was only 9, short by 1 point. He raised his hand to open a tear in the void and took out a potion he drank. I can access my personal dimension, but most of my things were in the floating city. He frowned even deeper. If I cannot accept the mana from the city, I will have to use Plan B. The next thing Edward checked was whether he could sense Netheril or Albion, but the answer was negative. I'll have to wait for Morgana to wake up, he said. He then raised his hand to cast a small flame. In the next hour, the flame kept extinguishing before reappearing. This world can adapt perfectly to all the magic systems I know. This is an anomaly, thought Edward. All the magic systems he used blended perfectly, and he sensed no rejection or even incongruity. It was as if the MCU already contained these power systems. There are 2 ways that could explain the situation. The MCU was already introduced to these systems and adapted them. But if that's the case, where? Edward thought of one possibility. Lord gods are active in this world, just like the Naruto universe. If the universe will of the MCU learned these power systems from the reincarnators, it could explain this anomaly. Another explanation is that the Marvel Universe is adapting to these magic systems to strengthen the entire universe and prepare for the war. The fusion with the comics and this adaptation might be part of this strengthening process. Edward felt both those theories might be correct and there might be a correlation between them. The universe will already knew the existence of these reincarnators and the magic systems, and when the fusion started to prepare for the war, it chose this method as another form of strengthening. Everyone is preparing, I must hurry. Edward meditated to facilitate the potion's fast absorption. The next morning, he woke up and went to see Aisha. I can send you home anytime, but before you leave, can I see your Noor? Oh, all right. Aisha created a fist made of hard light, and Edward's eyes turned purple as he analyzed it. A potent cosmic power with primary photonic properties. It seems to contain reality warping capabilities but is severely restricted in this dimension. He raised his hand to take a sample, and from it, he calculated the coordinates of the Noor dimension, which is Aisha's home. Edward frowned for a few seconds as he cast a few spells. All right, I found you a way home. Do you wish to go now? Right now. If you want, you can delay. No, I'm ready, replied Aisha. Are you sure? You could see your family before leaving? Or even take them with you? No, I don't want to disrupt their lives. Plus, I might face some trouble after returning. She was banished from the Noor dimension, and she will face some trouble after returning. If you say so, nodded Edward before taking a syringe. What's this? This is my reward for taking care of me, replied Edward. This thing contains nanites that will heal you in an emergency and serve as a supercomputer. It can help you better understand or control your Noor or aid you in anything you wish to accomplish after returning. Your dimension is so technically advanced. It is, nodded Edward. Do you want me to inject or do it yourself? You can do it. Are you sure? I spent so many years guarding and protecting you, I feel like I know you, said Aisha calmly. I don't know whether that's very kind or stupid of you, said Edward as he injected her. Aisha saw a screen that only she could see. For the next 5 minutes, she followed a tutorial with instructions on how to use the nanocomputer. Once she finished, Edward opened a portal, and all the members of the clandestine appeared in the room unconscious. It might be better to return with them lest they seek revenge on your family. That's a good idea, nodded Aisha before hesitantly saying, can you keep an eye on them for me? No problem. If you want, I can ensure they live a life of wealth and without worry. No, just ensure their safety. All right. Edward waved his hand to open another portal, but Aisha frowned. Why can't I sense any Noor energy? Your dimension will align with Earth on a specific date, and now is not the time. So, we must pass a few other dimensions to reach your destination. I see. Aisha exhaled before creating a large hand to carry the other clandestine members. She then stepped into the portal without hesitation. Edward followed her, and they traveled through a few portals before finding themselves in one full of Noor energy. Aisha could immediately sense her home. Thank you, she said, looking him in the eyes. I should be the one thanking you, said Edward with a smile. Plus, I feel this won't be the last time we meet. You can think so. My intuition is usually correct. Well, I'll look forward to it, said Aisha before entering and disappearing. Edward gathered enough Nor energy from the portal to study before returning to Earth. 2 days later, the Ancient One came to see him. "Thank you for allowing me to send her home," said Edward. Earth is protected from dimensional travel, so he could not bring her home without her consent. "No problem," nodded the Ancient One. "Have you thought about my offer?" "Yes, and I accept." "Excellent. Follow me to Kamar Taj for the oath." "No problem. But I should tell you I will need a month's break before I start my duty." "Oh, is there a reason?" "I need to save someone, and it's about time I became stronger. He's been stuck in Tier 8 for too long, and it's about time for a change." "That's good news to hear," said the Ancient One. The stronger he was, the higher the chances of their world surviving. The Ancient One opened a portal leading to a secret room in Kamar Taj for the oath. She wanted to get it done as soon as possible to relax. 588 Breaking the soul limit. "This is the oath stone, linked directly to the cosmos," said the Ancient One. "You only need to hold it and make the oath." Edward held the stone and looked at it. "The universe will?" "No, it is an entity that represents the cosmos. So, eternity is the one binding the contract." "You seem to know a lot." "I'm curious, and I've lived a long life well, compared to humans," Edward explained casually. After knowing how this thing worked, he had no issue swearing. Once he finished, a chain came out of the stone and entered his head. Edward swiftly checked, and as expected, the chain appeared around his soul flame, meaning it was truly the most binding contract form. "What now?" asked Edward as he returned the stone. "You will study under Wong, and once you've shown your talent, you can learn everything from me." Edward frowned. "Give me access to all your books, and I can master everything in less than 2 weeks." "I have no doubt about that," said the Ancient One. "However, you must participate in this performance. You want me to build prestige amongst the other sorcerers. Although I have the right to directly elect my successors, it would be easier if they could see how capable you were and accept my decision." "What about Caecilius?" asked Edward. "What about him? How do you want me to deal with him?" "Do as you please. Since I've chosen you as my successor, I won't intervene." "The Time Stone," continued Edward. "In 6 months, you should have everybody accept your status as the next Sorcerer Supreme. Afterward, I will hand it to you." Muttered Edward. "The situation is better than I anticipated." "What did you expect?" "Despite the oath, I expect more distrust and political struggle," replied Edward honestly. "When you get your hands on the stone and see the future I saw, you'll understand why I give you free rein." "Now, I want to know what you saw," said Edward, who immediately cast a spell to see the future. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." "Why?" "You should not be messing with any time magic not affiliated with the Time Stone before the year 2008, said the Ancient One. 2008? That's when Iron Man started, thought Edward. Is it because of the TVA? I thought they had already opened the multiverse since no one came to prune me. Edward knew about the TVA and ensured his landing would be after the event of Loki 1 when the TVA underwent a shuffling, opening the multiverse. Otherwise, his presence would have opened another timeline, and these people would have come to prune him to ensure the sanctity of the sacred timeline. Yes and no, explained the Ancient One. 2008 is a cutting point for the world. It's when everything goes into motion, and the Earth enters a new era. Your time magic might disrupt this event, leading to many problems. Was that one of the timelines you saw? Yes, nodded the Ancient One. Very well. Edward controlled his curiosity. He had a month's break before starting his sorcerer duty and training. By the way, do you know the coordinates of the planet Vormir? He tried divination to no success, so this planet was either naturally protected because of the stone or his divination skill was not up to par to find the coordinates. You want the soul stone? Yes. Sorry, but I don't, said the Ancient One. All right. I'll figure it out, replied Edward before leaving. He could have teleported to another timeline and taken it from Thanos' dead hands, but he figured it might be a better idea to use the one in his universe. Edward's next destination was to find Gamera and get the location from her mind. She was not protected, so it was easy to find her location while on a mission for Thanos on a planet called Greer. Watching her assassinate a man, he took the information from her mind before silently disappearing. He opened a portal to the planet Nohir, full of outlaws and criminals. He needed to find a cruel man full of sins who also cared deeply about someone, either their wife or daughter. That person also needed to be terrible and full of sins. It took a moment, but he found who he was searching for, a pair of criminal lovers called Lam and V. They are one of the biggest child traffickers on the side of this galaxy, and although they've committed many atrocities, they are also famous for their endearing life, willing to do anything for each other. Edward gave Lam a prophesied dream that he was destined to rule the universe as he was willing to sacrifice everything after reaching a place called Vormir. After this hypnosis, Lam woke up the next day and looked at his wife with complicated emotions. Then, on the same day, he hopped on his ship with her, heading directly to Vormir. By the time they reached their destination, the drug he placed on her beverage had functioned, and she passed out. Lam carried her onto the planet, and after the Guardian, Red Face, explained the situation, he kissed her one last time on her forehead before throwing her down the cliff. He did hold the stone in his hand, feeling the power coursing through his veins. With tears in his eyes, Lam walked inside his ship, preparing for his glorious future. However, his body immediately disintegrated. If not for Edward's power, how could he hold an infinite gem with such a weak and mortal body? As Edward held the stone, powerful energy rushed into his body. He controlled it to enter his soul dimension, heading directly to Morgana. He watched as her pale body rapidly recovered until it returned to normal. That's enough for now, he thought. She should be back to wake up in a few months and return to normal. He teleported to a deserted planet, where he immediately began to lay enchantments. For the next week, the planet was surrounded by hundreds of thousands of magic circles with the soul stone at the center. Let's begin, thought Edward as he activated the enchantments. A powerful soul energy rushed into his soul dimension, and he immediately started the process of fusing his soul into the soul flame. With the method he received from his Nasuverse counterpart, the process was fast and had no issue. Edward's soul released a blinding light, and afterward, he saw two small flames in his soul's eyes. It looked like an undead, commented Edward before shaking his head. The appearance did not matter, this experience's true value was breaking his soul's limit. Edward now felt it was a simple matter to reach higher tiers. The next step was to temper his body, and the soul stone was also the core of this process. He converted the soul energy released by the stone into life energy that tempered his body. In the meantime, he observed the new soul flame that grew on the fourth layer of his dimension while gathering data and experimenting. Edward knew this method was universal but still needed to test it out. So, while training his body and waiting for his second soul flame to appear, he conducted experiments on this method of breaking the soul limit. It is universal, and soul energy is not required but can help accelerate the speed of the process while also making it safer, concluded Edward. The process was not 100% as his experiments revealed that the soul flame could, in fact, destroy the soul despite its inherited connection, or they might reject the fusion. Now, let's test the soul divinity and reach tier 10 in one fell swoop, thought Edward before proceeding with the next part of his work. 589. Tier 10. The steps involving achieving soul divinity were to use the knowledge ring around the soul flame as a carrier for his willpower and rules before fusing it with the soul. Edward already had experience in the fusion, but he still needed trial and error to nourish willpower and rules. So, he first started with his willpower. The study of Haki has greatly increased the development and understanding of willpower throughout the Empire, so the process was easier than anticipated. Edward finished the fusion after a few trials and errors, and his soul flame changed. A light gold flame is required to reach tier 9, and during the previous breakthrough, his soul reached gold after absorbing enough energy from the soul stone. Now, after the fusion of his willpower, the gold was deepened, probably heading to the level required to become tier 11, deep gold. The next step in this process was the addition of rules, and Edward was in a small bind. He did not meet the requirement to wield the rules of this universe. Luckily, he was prepared for such a situation and created law weapons, containing all the laws he could wield, except for the soul and the mind, because he only achieved these laws in the Nasuverse and did not have the opportunity to create a weapon for them. He summoned the items from his personal dimension and began fusing them with his soul flame. He watched in wonder as his soul flame turned deep golden before heading toward dark gold. However, the process stopped because the soul gem could not provide enough energy to complete it. This is a problem, thought Edward. He guessed he could continue the soul divinity now and upgrade it later, but he would rather have his soul flame reach the limit before the fusion. However, it seems the energy needed for the process is not something even the soul gem could provide. He paused briefly to think of possible solutions. Edward's first thought was to use the same spell in the DC universe when dealing with Darkseid. He summoned soul gems from a different moment in time, increasing their numbers and providing him with more energy. This won't work since the Ancient One warned me about using my time magic. So, this plan might only work after she hands over the time stone, concluded Edward, who thought of his second plan, the doubling charm. This spell is a wandcraft spell that allows him to double items. Once he becomes tier 10, copying the soul gems should be no problem. Although he deduced they wouldn't exist for more than 30 minutes, they could still give him ample energy. The best option would be to link the soul gem to all its counterparts in the multiverse. This would provide me with more than enough energy for the process, but I don't have such a spell. Then, an idea suddenly popped into his mind. The Dark Hold might contain such a spell. The Dark Hold was written by the first demon, Thin, and that demon is definitely a tier 11 entity. And since the book will try to lure its owner by their deepest desires, it's possible to show Edward the spell he needs. That is an alternative, but let's not rush to dealing with such entities yet, thought Edward. He temporarily stopped the soul divinity transformation to focus on reaching tier 10. After a few days, Edward's body reached the requirement to enter tier 9. Then, something expected occurred before he even started. An unknown force grabbed him out of nowhere, sending him flying backward. He passed through a film, and his surroundings changed. What the fuck, thought Edward as he looked around. He was in this dark space with a red moon and purple sky. The atmosphere was eerie, and after a few seconds, a creature walked before him. It was over 3 meters tall with horns, red skin, and a mouth so large that it went from his left ear to the right. Your soul is interesting, you should be a delicious meal. Edward did not understand this creature's words, but the meaning directly entered his mind, indicating a form of soul or psychic communication. Who are you? Huh? Can you communicate with the soul? I guess that makes sense. This lord is the great Malachi, the Soul Eater, and today, you will have the honor of being my dinner. A dimensional overlord, thought Edward. Malachi opened his mouth to release a terrifying swallowing power. Edward's defensive abilities activated, but they were useless. Damn it, he's at least tier 10. Edward did not hesitate to activate his green lantern ring, releasing a green energy shield to protect him. His action was correct. His shield stopped the swallowing force. What an interesting artifact, commented Malachi. He raised his hand to shoot a powerful purple beam full of the power of a corrupted soul. Edward fired back with a green beam of concentrated willpower. Their concentration released intense universal-scale shockwaves, but nothing in the surroundings was destroyed. He has absolute control over this dimension. I need to leave as soon as possible, analyzed Edward after observing around. Malachi snapped his finger, and millions of winged creatures appeared behind him. Edward responded in kind by creating the Empire's Imperial Navy fleet to annihilate these creatures. He forced the Armada to focus on Malachi to buy him enough time to use the ring to tear through this dimension and escape. Malachi roared, and the entire dimension seemed to come alive, trying to prevent Edward's escape. However, he used that tiny hole he made to cast a spell to travel to another dimension he could sense. He did not stop there. He jumped a dozen dimensions before not sensing anyone following. Then, he finally returned to his previous location. What the hell just happened? He was baffled. If not for the ring, he might have been a goner. A sense of urgency rushed into his mind, so Edward took the planet to another location. He added a few million more enchantments to block the void and used the green lantern ring as a power source. Finally, he focused on the task at hand. He converted the soul energy from the stone into mana before absorbing it into his supersolid ether cores in his magic core and soul dimension. After reaching Tier 9 galaxy level, he felt a sublimation of his body and soul, even his willpower slightly increased. However, this was not Edward's endgame, and he continued his work. He tempered his body before absorbing enough energy to become a Tier 10 universal entity. The process was not simple because a galaxy was tiny compared to a universe. So, he had to reach the level of super galaxy, multiple galaxies, and galaxies clusters before he could achieve Tier 10. Luckily for him, the Infinity Stones were all Tier 10 objects with plenty of energy. Edward felt the power coursing through his veins. Although it was not the first time he'd controlled this level of mana, the feeling was different than before when it was his own power. Edward looked into the distance. The universe felt frail to him as he could do terrible catastrophes with one thought. His mind rushed to every corner of the universe, seeing every planet, star, and galaxy. There were a few places that his intuition told him not to check, and he listened. As expected, this world is hiding so many terrors, thought Edward. Despite reaching Tier 10, he knew he was not the only entity capable of affecting the universe on such a scale. However, the others seemed low-key, and he guessed there might be consequences for doing so. Regardless, we've made it so far, and that's what matters, thought Edward. Now, he must focus on reaching the next level, Tier 11. Boss, you look handsome. Morgana, you're awakened. Yeah, it's been a while, but you were in intense focus mode, and I didn't want to bother you, replied the purple-haired elf, who was wearing a magic robe as an outfit today. I'm glad you're all right, said Edward with a smile. I'm going to use Malachi as a training partner to adapt to my newfound strength. Let's catch up while I deal with him. All right. 590 strength testing. A complicated rune appeared before Edward as he tried to find Malachi's dimension for a second round. His petty self would never allow such a humiliation to go by. How long have you been awake? 3 years. What? It's been so long? I promised the Ancient One I would return after a month. She came by 2 years ago, said Morgana. I told her you were in the middle of something, and she was very understanding. That's good to hear. So, how are you doing? I'm feeling better than ever. Their souls were linked, so when Edward broke his soul limit and started the soul divination process, Morgana also felt improvement in her abilities. Edward nodded. So, what exactly happened? As I said, we crashed into a battle between two Tier 12 entities. The shockwave almost destroyed Netheril, and one of them glanced at us, which is why our souls and minds were injured. Edward sighed silently, feeling an intense desire to become more powerful and reach higher tiers. I teleported us, Netheril and Albion, to different timelines, hoping to divert their attention, Morgana continued. I used my last bit of strength to divine the closest dimension with the highest chances of survival and landed before that woman named Aisha. I planted a spiritual hint in her mind to ensure the safety of your body, then went into deep sleep to recuperate. Edward exhaled. In times like this, he's glad he had Morgana because, as a supercomputer, she can enter an ultralogical state and make the fastest and best decision to ensure his survival. This time around, I owe you big time. Of course. You should praise me more often and raise my wage, said the purple-haired elf with a smug look. I will, he chuckled. Do you know if Netheril was completely destroyed? In bad shape, but not completely destroyed. The auto-repair protocols should have been activated. Can you sense its location? Yes, but vaguely, said Morgana. It might take a while before I find it, Edward grunted, calculating whether he should start building another one. Now that he was Tier 10, it was not worth it to build another city since the value of Netheril is all his research data, materials, and artifacts stored. Let's put tracking it and Albion at the top of the list. Sir. 30 minutes later, he found Malachi's dimension and a smirk appeared on his face. He tore open the dimensional barrier and forcefully entered. Who dares invade the great Malachi's dominion? It's me, you red-skinned bastard. Boss, that sounded racist. Really? Do you think this is an appropriate time? I'm just warning you to watch out. It's you? A great anger rushed into Malachi's head, and he immediately sprung to action. Cry of the damned. A terrifying wailing sound that directly targeted the soul rushed toward Edward. Want to play the soul with me? Two can play at this game. Banshee cry. A black-red magic circle appeared before him, releasing a terrifying scream that seemed to burst any souls it came into contact with. Countless screams of agony echoed from deep within this dimension as these two powerhouses' attacks clashed. Malachi could not hide his shock. This little ant was a small meal for him less than a few seconds ago. For such a being, 3 years is a second, but now, he was on par with him. How could he accept such a thing? Dark soul flame, he roared. The entire dimension much larger than the observable universe turned into a furnace, releasing a dark flame with unimaginable powers. Purification flame. Edward created a golden flame around him to block the dark flame. However, he soon discovered he was rapidly being overwhelmed. The entire world seemed against him, trying to restrict and kill him at any cost. It's as I speculated. The dimension is like the god's divine kingdom, granting these creatures absolute power. Arcane domain, world of knowledge. Edward used his new domain, which involved projecting his soul dimension while weaving an entire dimension using a vast quantity of mana just like reality marbles. His domain crashed with Malachi's dimension, fighting for control. With his new power, Edward's flame suddenly became brighter and purified the dark flame. He wondered what would happen if he purified this entire dimension. Malachi's expression changed as he understood he was experiencing a dimensional invasion. If the enemy swallowed his dimension, he would lose all his powers and immortality. I won't let you, he thought before using his most famous tactic, soul sacrifice. He sacrificed trillions of souls to boost the strength of his dimension. The tide immediately shifted in his favor. Edward frowned. His battle prowess had drastically decreased without access to his laws. He summoned his time staff, trying to give himself another boost, but failed. It seems his dimension has a higher authority than yours, commented Morgana. Technically speaking, the staff should have worked inside his domain but did not, indicating that Malachi's dimension had priority. In other words, if I want to use my rules in dimensional battles, I must either find a way to increase my domain's authority or reach a willpower of 10 and wield the laws of the MCU universe, thought Edward with a grunt. Will blessing. He blessed his domain with his willpower using the hacky techniques from One Piece. His actions tilted things to his advantage, but he knew that was insufficient. So, he accessed the energy in his mana circles in the other two layers of his soul dimensions. After reaching Tier 10, he also elevated the two mana circles to Tier 10. Edward discovered he no longer needed to seal these dimensions as the mana became a part of his overall energy reserves. This meant that after becoming Tier 10, he was not at the bottom level of the powerhouses who could only destroy one universe. He had enough energy to destroy 4 to 5. He plans to add supersolid ether cores in the other two layers to further increase his mana capacity while following the path of dragons by building a dragon heart that stores mana in the cells. The gods in his universe have ruled over countless Tier 10 planes, so they are usually some of the best Tier 10 capable of destroying dozens if not 100 universes. With the blessing of new mana, Edward's domain became even more potent, rapidly empowering Malachi's dimension. Damn you, sorcerer, for forcing me to do this, roared Malachi as a glowing purple orb appeared above his large palm. He had just found a dimensional core and was prepared to fuse it with his dimension, elevating it to a higher level, thus increasing his strength and status. But now, he had to use it in this battle, which would waste a lot of energy. The purple orb released a light, and the sound of something cracking echoed through both these crashing universes/dimensions. Edward's domain showed signs of collapse. The throne behind had split in two, and the books floated everywhere, turned to ashes, or were separated from the middle. What the hell is that thing? It seems to contain a great deal of spatial energy, analyzed Morgana. I sense a power that reminds me of Krona. The universe will? Could that be why his dimension has a higher authority than yours and does not allow foreign rules to manifest? Possibly. If true, this world is more valuable than we anticipated, said Morgana. So, what's the plan? Let's retreat. We know too little about this world, said Edward, realizing how many things the movies never revealed. So, although he could continue fighting using the Soul Stone, he decided to just bail and return later. He disappeared from the dimension, leaving a roaring Malachi. After returning to his universe, he prepared to return to Kamar Taj but stopped after receiving a notification from the Akashic records. 591 Demon Gods. Edward checked his account on the Akashic record and learned he had received a message from Merlin. He was slightly surprised but guessed why, so he played. A projection of Merlin appeared before him, and he said, "Hey, boy, looking good." "I'm doing okay," replied Merlin. "No need to be polite. If I boast, you'll just beat my ego down, so what else can I say?" Edward shrugged. "True," chuckled Merlin. "By the way, this is a voice recording, I'm not actually there." Edward's face turned ugly. "Haha, I bet your face is twisted in anger now. Oh, I wish I was there to see it." Edward snorted coldly, deciding to ignore that drunk bastard. "I'll ignore what rude comment you made about just now," continued the recording, making Edward's lips twitch. "My message is to congratulate you on reaching Tier 10 while also warning you not to skip Tier 11 to go directly to Tier 12. Edward frowned. "Yes, it's possible to do that. You will usually see it in worlds like the MCU without linear power systems. Some people can destroy an entire multiverse and survive in the void, but their variants or counterparts in the multiverse are separate individuals. Sometimes, they have no variants and are the only entity in the entire multiverse. Edward had thought about this, as in the comics, some entities who are obviously tier 12 and above fight against their multiversal counterparts, which should never happen if all their variants are a part of themselves at tier 11. Tier 11 is important and must not be skipped if you want to reach higher levels, Merlin continued. Once you reach that level, I will contact you again to tell you about higher tiers and the war. Good luck to you, and remember that time is running out for all of us. The projection disappeared, leaving Edward with a somber atmosphere. Morgana, can you send the soul limit and soul divination methods to Hermione and the others? Without Netheril, the best I can do is send it home to my server and from there, send it to them, she replied. Then, do so. Before leaving, he left enough divine energy for everyone to break their limit and reach tier 9, but now he felt a sense of urgency, so he wanted them to become as powerful as possible as soon as possible. Edward's first order of business was not to return to Earth but to cast the doubling charm on the soul stone to absorb more energy for his soul divinity. However, the experiment was only partially successful, as the copies lasted less than a second. He absorbed a tremendous amount of energy in that brief moment, but it also cost him too much mana to keep copying, so he could only give up this plan. He'll try again once he has the time stone. Edward opened a portal to Earth but found himself floating outside its atmosphere, with a powerful shield blocking him. What's going on? Please seal most of your energy, said a voice in the void, and Edward recognized the Ancient One. Edward frowned before sealing most of his mana. Finally, he bypassed the protection and appeared at Kamar Taj, where the Ancient One awaited. What just happened? The Earth Dimension Protection Shield considers you a dimensional creature, so it stopped you, explained the Ancient One. But I'm obviously not. Your magic system is quite similar to theirs, considering the amount of energy and the 2 dimensions you have in your body. That's not fair since all life has a soul dimension. True, but they do not contain energy or can be materialized, rebutted the Ancient One. Fair, sighed Edward. I'm guessing you saw my fight with Malachi. I did, and it was splendid, she replied calmly. Why did that bastard attack me? You were unlucky, the planet you chose had weakened dimensional barriers. Adding the energy in your body, you were the perfect meal. So, my luck backlash hasn't ended. Luck backlash. I've abused a potion that increased luck, and now, I'm paying for it. That is concerning, the Ancient One frowned, and Edward agreed. Unfortunately, there was nothing he could do since the Empire's study on luck or probability manipulation had not been up to standard compared to most other fields. Who exactly is this Malachi? Edward had never heard of him in the MCU or even the comics. He's one of the 72 demon gods. Demon gods. Our job as sorcerers is to protect the Earth from all sorts of dimensional creatures or entities, and amongst them, the 72 demon gods and 36 hell lords are our worst enemies. Malachi is one of the lower 72 demon gods. Lower demon gods? Asked Edward, knowing the insinuation of these words. Yes, they are divided into lower, middle, and upper, and kings, and Malachi is one of the best lower demon gods, but still a lower rank. Edward's mouth twitched. He could not accept the fact that the weakest of these demon gods was tier 10. Sorry if I sound rude, but there is no way you can survive against these guys if Malachi is only a lower demon god. The Ancient One chuckled. That sounds fair, but the situation is more complex than you think. Agamotto and a few former Sorcerer Supremes sealed most of 7 kings while the rest are still healing. Many of the demon gods are in deep slumbers that last millions of years, and some have no desire to invade and increase their strength. Meanwhile, the Hell Lords have been forced to sign a treaty that their main body cannot enter the material plan, so they are usually sneaky and send in avatars to use schemes and machinations to interfere in Earth's affairs. So, that leaves a few upper demon gods like Dormammu as true adversaries. Edward's brow was still furrowed. That explains a lot, but many things still don't make sense. For example, I know how someone like you, with mastery of the mystic art and the time stone, can deal with a demon god, but what about those other sorcerers? I doubt they could survive the very air in some of these dimensions. You're underestimating my sorcerer's capabilities, explained the Ancient One. However, the answer to your question is the dimensional nullifier. When those creatures try to invade Earth, before they can evade reach the protection, they must pass through the dimensional nullifier, a special dimension that drastically decreases their powers. Is that why Dormammu most destroyed the protection first before invading? Correct, they know that the best and only way to invade Earth is from the inside, nodded the Ancient One. Edward sighed. This world is way more complicated than I thought. You have no idea, replied the Ancient One. She thought she knew most of the universe's secrets and nothing could shock her, but she knew how wrong she was after seeing the future past her death. We have lost more than 3 years, it might be a good idea to change the original plan, suggested Edward. You're right, she nodded. I still think you need to display your talent and convince the other sorcerers. However, you can use the time stone in a few days to see the future I saw and prepared. What about the soul stone? Any suggestions? Once you see what I saw, you can decide what to do with it or the others, the Ancient One responded calmly. All right. We can start tomorrow since I want to check on Aisha's family. Since he promised to keep an eye on them, he would keep his word. I did it in your stead, and they're fine. Oh, then you have my gratitude. Edward did not leave since she said they were okay. He would still check, but not in person. He followed the Ancient One to his room and received the Wi-Fi password. A little tired after his breakthrough in strength, he chose to sleep. It's been a while, and he felt he needed the rest. 592 The future get up. Edward opened his eyes. You must be Mordo. The Ancient One talked about you. Likewise. Oh, what did she say? She claims she found a natural prodigy of the mystic art. You don't sound convinced, said Edward, standing up from the small bed. Your abilities have yet to be known or tested, Mordo explained calmly. Please change into the appropriate uniform. I'll wait outside. I forgot how rigid this man's ideal and thoughts were, thought Edward as his magic robe turned into the camouflage grey uniform. Mordo is the kind of person who cannot get along with someone like him who constantly disobeys the rules to push boundaries. Edward walked out while thinking of ways to ensure his relationship with these people. So fast. I didn't want to be late. It seems you are at least very disciplined. That's good, nodded Mordo, leading them to a group of students dressed in horrible-looking clothes. Mordo then began to speak to the young sorcerers. You must go beyond your normal senses to feel the energy coming from those dimensions and harness them for use. You must. He gave a 30-minute explanation, making some students wonder why he was telling them this again. Mordo then ended the lecture with a few demonstrations. Interesting, thought Edward. They change their brain and soul frequency to perfectly attune to the surrounding dimensional seas and harness the energy from them. Their meditation technique is genius and perfectly fitted for humans. Edward closed his eyes and followed Mordo's method. He found himself in a sea of colorful lights rushing in all directions. Those should be dimensions, thought Edward, feeling how absurdly easy it was to access the energy from these dimensions. When he compared sorcerer magic in the Empire, which requires a gate of truth and so much effort, it was truly baffling how easily this method made things. This method makes it so easy that 90% of humans can do it after the right training, concluded Edward. Of course, talents would dictate how long it takes, but as long as someone perseveres, even with the worst talent, they can succeed in 5 to 8 years. Edward sighed as he continued praising this method, thinking how much it would help the Empire. He made the motions with his hands to draw the energy, creating a shield that resembled yellow runes before him. So, that's eldritch magic, thought Edward, slightly intrigued. Because of how weak a human's body is, they cannot channel too much energy from other dimensions, so they must rely on skill mastery or relics. The Ancient One is a great sorcerer because of her skill and because her body is strengthened by energy from the dark dimension. I do not have such restrictions on my body, but I should learn their skill mastery of using and manipulating interdimensional energy, he concluded. Excellent, said Mordo, who walked by him. You succeed on your first try. Edward just nodded to him. In that case, let's try a few more advanced spells. He had the students practice conjuring weapons like whips and others, and none of these tasks bothered Edward as he easily learned them. Everyone took a break for lunch, and the students looked at Edward oddly. However, he quickly joined them as he was a master of conversation. Since he wanted to gather support to prevent rejection for being chosen as the next Sorcerer Supreme, he knew the importance of being well liked. So, he put on his emperor smile to charm people. The afternoon lesson is hand-to-hand combat, said Mordo. As a sorcerer, you must train your mind and body. Now, on your guard. Edward fought with him for a minute before restraining him. Mordo could not accept this easy defeat and chose a second round with weapons, so he handed him a short baton while using one. The result was the same. You were trained. Yes, nodded Edward, making Mordo sigh. I felt guilty for doubting the Ancient One's words, even for a moment, but now, she's proven that her visions are beyond what I can understand. Edward's lips twitched. He loved it when his followers were this devoted to him, but in this situation, Mordo's devotion was a problem. It was one of the reasons he left Carmartage after finding out the Ancient One was not who he thought she was. Maybe it's not bad to lose people like Mordo and Caecilius, thought Edward. As long as he prevented them from doing anything reckless, losing 1 or 2 sorcerers, even if they were talented, should not be an issue. The third training session of the day was on how to use the sling ring, another discovery Edward found very useful. This relic made it easier to control a specific type of energy that allowed for opening portals to any dimension. He had the idea of augmenting this thing to function for all spatial energy. There will be many benefits and advantages if space magic becomes more common in the Empire. Of course, there will also be more chaos and danger, but he will prepare for these eventualities before releasing this knowledge or technology. At night, Edward did not have time to head to the library when the Ancient One summoned him. How was it? Fine. Little slow for my taste, but many things in your magical system are valuable to mine. I'm glad, she nodded. I wanted to wait a few days, but after seeing you in action today, I figured I might as well get it over with. She then removed the Eye of Agamotto from her neck and handed it along with a book. Edward took 30 minutes to read the entire book and absorb all the knowledge. Understand? The Ancient One asked. Yes. Questions? A few, said Edward. In the next 30 minutes, he asked questions, and she answered. After that, they spent an hour discussing time magic and losing track of time. The Ancient One sighed. It's been a while since I had such a captivating conversation about the mystic art. The last time was when she talked to Odin and his wife, Freya, a few hundred years ago. Let's get back on track. She took a bite from an apple and placed it on a counter before them. Is this necessary? Asked Edward. For my peace of mind, she explained. So, Edward used the time stone to manipulate time and returned the apple to different states. Then, the Ancient One tried a few more difficult tests before she allowed him to peep into the future. He wondered what she saw and what he needed to prepare for, so he got into positions and peeked into the future. An hour later, Edward woke up without saying a word. What's on your mind? I want to cuss. By all means. And asterisk percent dollar, 08, he went on a 20-minute tirade, cursing in more than 100 languages, some of which did not exist in this universe. Finally, he exhaled and said, I'm sorry. It's fine. You lasted less than I did. The Ancient One had the same reaction as her. She cussed for the first time in hundreds of years, and she did not stop after 20 minutes. So, what did Edward see that made him react like this? A multiverse convergence, all infinite timelines and dimensions crash and fuse into each other until only one timeline remains. And in the process, countless terrifying creatures emerge, including those who defy common sense. On top of everything else, many of these creatures are tier 11 and maybe beyond. In fact, the only reason these creatures did not kill his peeping self across spacetime was due to the protection of the time stone and his swift actions to evade them. So, what are you going to do? Asked the Ancient One, and Edward stared at her. She's the one who brought him into this mess. You can't blame me for your decisions. Edward exhaled, there is no need to freak out and lose my calm. If this is enough to rattle me out, I won't survive the upcoming war. He returned to his cool and logical side. We have a lot of work to do, and I'm telling you beforehand, it will not be pretty. That's why I chose you, she replied with a smile. 593 The new Sorcerer Supreme. So, what is the plan? Asked the Ancient One. I have a few ideas, but I need a few days to plan everything out, grunted Edward, caressing his head. Beforehand, you must prepare to hand over the Sorcerer Supreme position in about 3 months. That seems a little fast, but alright. Anything specific you want me to do? First, show the others that you are mentoring me personally. Second, after a month, release a rumor that I'm the next Sorcerer Supreme. In the second month, release a rumor that you will retire, and in the third month, we hold a public ceremony for my new position. Edward noticed many of these sorcerers' extreme worship of the Ancient One, so no one would doubt her decision. However, they might be reluctant to watch her retire, which could cause trouble enacting his plans if those people do not respect or accept his authority. Very well, nodded the Ancient One, and Edward left for his room. Morgana appeared and asked, what's the plan? Do you want to start training these people in the ways of arcane magic? Yes, but we cannot follow the same path as our home. I was going to suggest thinking of an alternative method since we are running out of time. The Empire's magical system took too much time, effort, and resources. As such, it was not suitable since they only had less than 3 decades. What's your plan? She asked. Edward waved his hand to manifest a hologram created from his thoughts. These people are sorcerers, so let's use this fact to our advantage. Morgana looked at the schematic before her, deep in thought. This is good, especially since this world favors the sorcerer way of magic. That's what I was thinking. In that case, let's get to work. We have a lot to do, said the purple-haired elf, dressed like sorcerers. Edward began his work, and starting the following day, he would receive lessons from Mordo in the morning, read in the library in the afternoon, and learn with the Ancient One at night. Then, as he said, in just 2 weeks, he would master all the knowledge in Camartage. Mirror Dimension. Edward bent the entire city of New York so that the skyscrapers became the sky. This world's understanding and application of the mirror dimension is truly advanced. Indeed, nodded Morgana, who also began stacking skyscrapers to create a building that rushed from the ground to the moon. She was having too much fun. I feel like we can benefit immensely in this world if we can survive the turmoil. Edward agreed with this statement. After applying what he had learned for a few hours, he left the mirror dimension to continue his work. However, as soon as he appeared, Mordo rushed into his room. Emergency, we're under attack. From who or what? The Fierce Beast Dimension, replied Mordo, who seemed to hesitate about something. What is it? The Ancient One wishes you to participate. Is there a problem with that? Mordo sighed, you are probably the most talented sorcerer Camartage has ever seen. But it doesn't change the fact that you're young and inexperienced. I fear she might be sending you into battles too soon. Edward looked at him oddly, considering he was much older than Mordo by a few centuries, no, millennia. However, he accepted the latter's concern. Previously, he might have thought it was right to let Mordo follow his previous path, but he would not do so for many reasons. Firstly, he saw that Mordo was a kind and understanding individual, just a little stubborn in his ways. His act of putting the Ancient One on a pedestal was one of the causes of his downfall. Secondly, he could not give up such a talented sorcerer if he wanted to have a chance to survive the multiversal war. Edward patted his shoulder, I have seen horrors you could not possibly imagine. Plus, I'm way older than you by a few centuries. Mordo looked at him, are you serious? I don't need to lie, replied Edward. Talent is insufficient to explain how quickly I can learn and adapt. You've dabbled in the mystic art before. Yes, and for centuries. However, my way differs from yours, so I needed to adapt, he explained. But, I know you have many questions, but they will be answered soon enough. Now, let's go. Edward headed to a place inside the temple where he was first transported to the New York Sanctorum before being teleported to an unknown place with purple sky, earth, and grass. A black portal stood in the distance, surrounded by countless sorcerers. Is this the dimension nullifier? Exactly, said the Ancient One, who opened a portal beside him. I thought you should watch how we faced these threats and maybe see if there are any improvements you can make. Edward nodded as he watched the battle. The fierce beast, who looked like mutated creatures from Earth, became drastically weaker once they passed through the portal, giving the sorcerer a decent chance in the fight. The sorcerers were pretty organized. The weaker and inexperienced ones worked together to cast defensive shields on others or use attacks like Eldritch Whip to restrict the enemy. The more powerful ones directly confronted these creatures. Two creatures saw Edward and the Ancient One in the distance and leaped dozens of meters into the sky toward them. Edward waved his hand to open a portal and closed it, cutting the creature in half. The Ancient One remained quiet, not batting an eye. Edward lowered his body to look at the creature. What do you do with the bodies? We used some of them to make relics, but most are sent to the Inferno dimension for recycling, explained the Ancient One. I may have a better use for them, he muttered. The two watched this battle, only helping to ensure no one died. Once that was over, the dimensional portal closed, and Earth was safely protected. What do you think? Besides missing healing and buff spells, I have no comment, given the low numbers and fighting style. Those types of magic are not our strong suit, nodded the Ancient One. 3 months passed, and it was Edward's crowning ceremony to become the Sorcerer Supreme. The sorcerers were unsurprised as these rumors had been spreading for months, but some people still felt it was too soon for the Ancient One to retire. Regardless, the majority of sorcerers across the 3 sanctums, leaving a few people to protect them. The ceremony went smoothly as the Ancient One handed him the Eye of Agamotto. Edward then looked at the crowd to begin his speech. I know many of you have questions, feeling this situation is a little rushed, he said in a voice everyone could hear. And I can tell you there is a reason for everything. The sorcerers focused their eyes, listening deeply. The Ancient One saw a terrifying future where we failed our missions to protect Earth and our reality. Our universe was wiped out from existence. These sorcerers looked at him as if he were crazy. However, after seeing the seriousness in his expression and the Ancient One's nod, they began to murmur. How could this happen? Asked someone. I can show you if you desire, said Edward as he snapped his finger, showing them snippets of the terrible future he saw. Many people immediately began to yell. Impossible. That's not true, that's an illusion. So much death. My family, how can they survive such a catastrophe? Edward frowned, realizing these people might go insane as their minds break. So, he snapped his finger to remove the memory from their mind but left the impression the memory had on them. Is this really the future? Asked Wang. Edward did not answer but motioned for the Ancient One to say something. Yes. I saw this future years ago and have been preparing to change it. I saw countless futures and possibilities, and the best answer I came up with is him. She pointed at Edward. How can he help us? He has mystical knowledge from an extremely advanced magical civilization, the ancient explained. With that knowledge and his decisive and unorthodox means, we will have a slight chance of survival. The sorcerers quieted down briefly before saying, Salutation to the Sorcerer Supreme. This chant echoed throughout the entire mountain. Edward nodded calmly. The Ancient One might have sugar-coated things for you, but I won't. My unorthodox means are cruel, inhumane, vile, and devoid of any morality. In other words, I will do whatever it takes to protect the Earth and our reality. I don't expect you to accept some of my actions, but you must follow them. If you're unwilling, please be prepared to leave, as I will not accept insubordination. I am responsible for the lives of too many people, and I will not consider your feelings or morality when protecting them. Is that understood?